Hey guys, tonight we slip into an ancient world where darkness doesn't bring silence. It just changes the type of noise that surrounds you. The sun sinks, the air cools, and you probably imagine that people in early cities drifted off to sleep under peaceful skies. But as you're about to find out, you probably won't survive this version of nighttime without a mild emotional breakdown. Because in these cities, Rome, Alexandria, Athens, Babylon, Chang'an, the night was not a soft blanket. It was a whole different creature that woke up when everyone else wanted to rest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know your current location and local time in the comments. I love seeing the little constellation of night owls watching together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the ancient street just as daylight gives up. A reddish glow lingers on stone walls, and for a brief second you think the coming night might be peaceful. But then you hear it, an echoing clang, distant shouting, a donkey braying like it's auditioning for a horror movie. Whatever fantasy you had about ancient nighttime calm evaporates as the city begins its true shift. In the ancient world, night was when people worked, wandered, schemed, panicked, or partied. And you're right in the middle of it. You move down a narrow lane paved with uneven stones, the type that look charming in museums but feel suspiciously like ankle traps when you're actually walking on them. Houses rise above you like crooked teeth, stacked floors, leaning beams, wooden shutters rattling in the slightest wind. Some of these shutters don't even close properly. Privacy wasn't exactly a strong point in early urban design, but noise absolutely was, a mainstream historical fact. Ancient cities packed people ridiculously close together. Rome, for example, shoved hundreds of thousands into dense blocks of apartments called insulae, which had thin walls, shared stairwells, and a surprising talent for catching fire. Silence was basically a myth unless you were wealthy enough to own a house at the top of a hill, and even then you'd still hear the city wheezing below like a giant with insomnia. You wander farther, and as your eyes adjust in the near dark, you begin noticing the movements around you. Lamps flicker in windows, families argue about chores, a child drops something heavy, probably on purpose, and someone's grandmother is shouting from an upper balcony with the confidence of a drill sergeant. It's strangely comforting, though. Everyone is awake, and everyone seems loudly committed to letting the whole neighborhood know exactly what they're doing. The quirky tidbit for this section: some cities purposely released noisy animals into the streets at night to eat garbage. Seriously. In parts of the ancient Mediterranean, pigs and dogs wandered like informal sanitation workers, snorting, yapping, and knocking over baskets as they went. Imagine trying to sleep with an entire pig snuffling outside your window at 2 a.m. This wasn't just a one-time occurrence. It was policy. As you keep moving, a warm breeze pushes past you, carrying the smell of roasted grain, donkey sweat, and something burning in a way that makes you decide not to investigate further. Night doesn't erase the city's scent, it just rearranges it. Inside homes, people are cooking, cleaning, or having one last overly loud discussion about who forgot to fetch water earlier. And then there's the debate, because historians still argue whether ancient cities were noisier at night than during the day. On one hand, the daytime market chaos was legendary. On the other hand, nighttime activities were just as intense but concentrated into tighter spaces: cramped alleys, shared courtyards, tavern clusters, and bustling harbour districts. The sound had fewer places to escape. So the truth may be that the noise didn't decrease. It just changed pitch. A dog darts past your leg, giving you a startled moment where you question both your agility and your life choices. That's joke number 1. Don't worry, you'll get 2 more before the end of this 1,000-word stroll. But it's true that animals owned the streets after dark. No leashes, no rules, no bedtime. And then, from somewhere above, a clay jug falls and shatters, maybe dropped, maybe blown over by the wind, maybe thrown at a neighbour who deserved it. In ancient cities, rooftop life was a real thing. People stored items, dried laundry, hosted tiny late-night gatherings, or just stood up there to escape the heat, which meant objects occasionally plummeted. You're fine, though, probably. A pair of older men shuffle past you deep in conversation about next day's work, or maybe politics, or maybe gossip about a neighbour's cousin's scandal. You can't quite follow, but the tone suggests excitement. Conversations carried far in ancient streets, especially with stone walls acting like accidental amplifiers. Even a whisper could bounce around like it had its own agenda. Someone is sweeping nearby, not gently either. The broom's scraping rhythm is surprisingly aggressive, like the person is taking out personal frustrations on the ground. You don't judge. If you lived here, you'd probably do the same. That's joke number 2. You pause at a corner where the street widens for a moment. A small crowd is gathered around a storyteller, casually performing at this late hour. Epic tales weren't restricted to daylight. People loved gathering under oil lamps to listen, laugh, argue about plot points, and drop coins when the story was especially good. You linger, but the noise makes it hard to stay still for long. Something catches your attention in the distance. Metal clanging. It's rhythmic, like someone tapping on a pole. You'll learn more about this later, but for now, let's just say the Night Watch made sure everyone knew they were on duty. Subtlety was not their strength. Your final light joke for this section arrives as a rooster begins crowing, even though it is absolutely not dawn. Roosters in ancient cities didn't care about sunrise. They cared about enthusiasm and vibes, and tonight, this one is thriving. By now, the darkness has fully settled, but the city has only grown louder. And as you continue walking, you begin to understand the simple truth. Ancient nighttime wasn't quiet because people didn't need it to be. Silence wasn't a cultural expectation. Noise meant life was happening, and in this world, life never really rested. You barely finish adjusting to the city's restless darkness before another wave of noise sweeps over you, this time sharper, more rhythmic, almost theatrical. You follow the sound as it echoes through the maze of alleys, and soon you find yourself approaching one of the most unavoidable nighttime disturbances in the ancient world. Vendors who simply refused to stop yelling. You round the corner and immediately spot the first culprit, a man standing beside a woven basket piled high with figs. He cups his hands around his mouth and bellows, "Fresh, sweet, best price before sunrise." It's midnight. You check the sky. Definitely midnight. But he's determined, and he's not even the only one doing it. A mainstream historical fact slides into place here. In many ancient cities, selling didn't follow modern schedules. Markets often overflowed into the night because daytime heat was brutal, customers were busy, or workers only finished chores after dark. So vendors took advantage of cooler hours and wandering crowds to hawk their goods whenever they could. In Rome, Athens, and Alexandria, nighttime commerce wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. You pass a woman selling lamp oil, her voice surprisingly strong for someone who looks like she's been awake for 3 days. She shakes a little clay jar to prove it's full, the hollow sloshing echoes like she's performing a percussion solo. Beside her, a man selling fish waves one around dramatically every time someone walks by, because subtle advertising hasn't been invented yet. You appreciate the passion, though you're not sure the fish appreciates being used as a visual aid at this hour. Then someone behind you shouts about hot bread. You turn, confused. Didn't the bakers work at sunrise? But no, this isn't a baker. It's a man with a tiny portable brazier warming yesterday's leftovers, like a proto-street food stand. His business model seems to be, it's late, you're tired, and you might be hungry enough to ignore the smell, joke number 1. And you know what? People gather anyway. The noise builds like a choir of capitalism. Sellers yell prices, buyers shout counters, someone accuses someone else of cheating. A kid tries to steal a date and gets publicly scolded with impressive vocabulary. Even the produce gets loud. Pots clank, baskets scrape, and someone overturns a crate of onions, which somehow roll farther than physics should allow. The quirky tidbit arrives just as you move deeper into this improvised nighttime bazaar. Some vendors in ancient cities used singing as a sales technique. Not pleasant singing, this wasn't a musical. More like rhythmic chants or call and response. In parts of the Near East, melon sellers would sing the virtues of their fruit in repetitive refrains, basically inventing the world's earliest jingles. You hear a man doing exactly that now, singing badly but confidently, and you appreciate his dedication. Historians still argue whether nighttime vending was truly essential or just opportunistic chaos. Some say the late-night economy helped cities cope with overcrowding. Others believe vendors simply ignored rules because enforcement was terrible. Maybe both are true. Maybe rules never stood a chance against someone determined to shout cheap olives at 1 a.m. You move through the crowd, weaving past people carrying baskets, jars, pottery, even small animals tucked under arms. One guy brushes your shoulder and mutters something that sounds like careful, though it might also mean buy something. Hard to tell. Ancient languages didn't exactly come with subtitles. A woman with a cart of herbal poultices waves you closer. She promises better sleep if you buy her mixture, which, considering the current noise level, feels like an outright miracle claim. She opens a jar, releases a puff of something grassy and sharp, and insists this is the secret cure ancient people used against nighttime disturbances. You politely decline, not wanting to inhale anything that smells like angry salad. That's joke number 2. The density of people surprises you. The market lanes feel more crowded now than during daylight. Workers who couldn't shop earlier finally have time. Travellers arriving late want food. Families finishing chores need supplies. Sailors, labourers, servants and night owls all cross paths here, forming a kind of half-awake ecosystem. Someone nearby drops a stack of clay bowls, and the crash rings out like a mini-earthquake. The vendor groans loud enough to make Zeus roll over in Olympus. Then, in a classic ancient city move, he blames the person nearest him, whether or not they were involved. Voices rise, hands wave, spectators gather, forming a judgment circle. Ancient cities never missed a chance for theatrical conflict. You slide away, not eager to star in the sequel. The air thickens with smells: fruits, spices, meat, sweat, smoke from torches and lamps. Oil lamps flicker everywhere, their faint hiss mixing with the hum of voices. Shadows stretch and overlap as people move, creating moving silhouettes that make the whole scene feel alive. The city doesn't sleep, it just changes shifts. As you step back into a slightly quieter side street, a final burst of vendor enthusiasm trails behind you. A man shouting about honey cakes with such urgency you'd think the fate of the empire depended on them. Your third light joke lingers as you imagine this man, centuries later, reincarnated as someone who aggressively hands out coupons at a mall entrance. Some spirits never change, and even though you're relieved to leave the shouting behind, you know this is only the beginning. Because in ancient cities, nighttime wasn't a retreat from noise, it was a redistribution of it, and more voices, more sounds are waiting just ahead. You don't make it far before a new wave of sound rolls over you, thicker, warmer, and far more chaotic than the vendor chorus you just escaped. It hits like a gust of laughter mixed with clattering cups, a few questionable songs, and one man yelling in a tone that suggests he has either won or lost a bet. You round another street corner and find yourself standing before one of the most unstoppable nighttime machines in the ancient world, the tavern district. If you thought vendors shouting at midnight felt excessive, taverns take it personally. You approach the first doorway, where lamplight spills into the street like molten gold. Inside, bodies pack tightly into a single dim room. A table shakes as someone slams down a cup. Another person stomps their foot to emphasize a story that is almost definitely a lie. A pair of friends laugh so loudly you expect their lungs to revolt, and a group in the corner appears to be arguing over something extremely philosophical or extremely dumb. There is no middle ground in here. A mainstream historical fact: ancient taverns rarely closed early. In places like Rome and Pompeii, nightlife culture was incredibly strong. Taverns, wine shops, popinay and snack houses operated deep into the night, sometimes until dawn, serving cheap wine, hot food, gossip and trouble. Written complaints from ancient residents literally describe sleepless nights caused by the clamour of drinkers and dice players, which honestly sounds like a Yelp review waiting to happen. Someone bumps into you as they stumble out the door, muttering an apology but sounding proud of their wobble. Another man exits dramatically, shouting something about destiny, storms back inside, and then re-emerges holding a bowl of stew like that was his entire character arc. Joke number 1. You weave between taverns, each one with its own noise signature. One is filled with singers belting out what might be folk songs or drunken improvisations. Another hosts raucous dice games, wooden cups rattling, coins clinking, losers groaning theatrically. Somewhere, a lute plays, though the musician seems to be fighting a losing battle against the mob's volume. The smells here are bold: spice stew, spilled wine, sweat, warm bread, and the faint smoky tang of oil lamps. You take a few steps deeper, feeling the sound thicken around you. Taverns weren't built for acoustics, they were built for bodies. Stone walls made every shout echo tenfold. Conversations layered over each other until you couldn't tell who was angry, who was joyous, and who was simply trying to order another drink. You catch a glimpse of something unusual inside the next tavern. People standing around a large board carved with symbols. They're placing stones, debating moves with the seriousness of military commanders. It's an early form of board gaming, and yes, the stakes seem high. Someone slams their hand down, not even on their own piece, and erupts in triumph. The loser protests dramatically, probably inventing 3,000-year-old gaming saltiness. Joke number 2. Time blends strangely in this district. Hours don't matter, only torchlight, company, and volume. Night was prime time for socializing because daytime labor exhausted people. And in a world with no screens, no headphones, and no streaming shows, taverns were entertainment, whether you wanted to join or not. Now for your quirky tidbit. In some ancient cities, tavern keepers hired what were essentially noisemakers or hype men. Their job? To encourage gambling, drinking, and general chaos to keep customers engaged and spending. Imagine someone being paid specifically to shout louder than everyone else. You hear one such hype man now, chanting rhythmically to spur on a group of gamblers who look seconds away from flipping the entire table. A sudden crash interrupts everything. The unmistakable sound of a jug breaking. The tavern erupts, half the room cheering as though this is a sport. The tavern keeper sighs loudly and sweeps up the shards with the resignation of someone who has accepted their fate. Historians still argue whether these taverns were mostly harmless or genuine hotbeds of crime. Some ancient writers portrayed them as dens of thieves and political schemers. Others saw them as community centres where ordinary people bonded over shared stories. The truth likely depends on the specific block, the specific night, and the amount of wine involved. You step away from one doorway to avoid a man enthusiastically gesturing with a bowl of lentils. He says something like, "You must try this," while absolutely ignoring the fact that he is spilling it in every direction. His friend pulls him back inside, laughing so hard you suspect it might be the highlight of his month. Passing by another building, you hear a sharp argument. Two men shouting about sports. Not modern sports, of course. Probably chariot racing, the ancient world's version of heated team rivalries. Someone slams their hands on a table. Someone else fires back with an insult that, based on tone alone, probably stings even 2,000 years later. Another tavern hosts a completely different vibe. Quiet gambling, low murmurs, a soft hum of tension. Every rolled die produces a ripple of whispers. You stay back from that one. It has the energy of a place where someone loses a bet and suddenly owes 10 amphorae of wine or a goat. The street between taverns buzzes with activity too. Couples whisper loudly, groups move in packs, and street musicians take advantage of the crowds. A man plucks a lyre, but the melody is immediately swallowed by voices. A woman beats a small hand drum with the confidence of someone who knows she will be heard no matter what. And as you walk, you notice something subtle. Taverns never fall quiet. Not for a moment. Even when a door closes, the muffled rumble inside continues like a never-ending storm. For ancient residents living even a few buildings away, this meant nights filled with shouting, singing, stomping, and the occasional scream of victory or outrage. Your final light joke for the hour hits as you watch someone try to leave a tavern while dramatically swearing they are completely sober, only to walk straight into a pillar. Absolute ancient slapstick. You finally move on, leaving the tavern glow behind. But the echoes follow you, bouncing down the alley like mischievous ghosts, and as you head deeper into the night, you already know the next part of the city is even louder. Because humans weren't the only creatures making a racket after dark. You leave the tavern district thinking, hoping that the noise might finally taper off. You survived vendors yelling at midnight and drinkers celebrating questionable life choices. Surely the city has run out of lungs by now. But then you hear it. A howl, a squeal, a bray, a cluck, a chorus so chaotic it sounds like someone pressed shuffle on nature's least relaxing playlist. And you remember the absolute truth of ancient cities. Animals didn't go to bed when humans did. They clocked in. You follow the sounds into a wider street lit by scattered torches and moonlight. Shadows flicker across uneven stones. Something rustles near your feet. You glance down and, yes, of course, a chicken sprints past you like it's fleeing a tax collector. One feather spins dramatically in its wake. Welcome to the nighttime animal kingdom. A mainstream historical fact to anchor the chaos. Ancient cities were full of free-roaming animals. Pigs wandered streets in Rome and Alexandria. Donkeys were used as nighttime delivery engines. Dogs patrolled garbage heaps. Even goats showed up where you least expected them. Urban animal control wasn't exactly a priority. Animals were workers, companions, trash processors, and sometimes just noisy roommates the city never asked for. A dog barks at nothing. Actually, you correct yourself. Dogs in ancient cities never barked at nothing. They barked at everything. A pebble, a leaf, a suspicious smell, a philosophical concept. This dog seems especially invested in warning the moon to mind its business. Then you hear hooves. A donkey emerges from the shadows dragging a small cart filled with sealed jars. The driver follows behind, half asleep, mumbling encouragement at a volume that suggests he thinks the donkey is hard of hearing. The animal brays loudly in complaint, a sound halfway between a squeal and a personal attack. That noise alone could wake a pharaoh. The cart's wooden wheels rattle violently on the stones. You flinch. The donkey flinches. The jars probably flinch. Joke number 1. You briefly consider sending a noise complaint to ancient city management, but you suspect they'll just sacrifice a goat and call it a day. You press deeper into the block, stepping over a sleeping cat. A fluffy, unimpressed creature sprawled across the street like it pays rent. The cat opens one eye, judges your existence, and promptly returns to sleep. Cats, it seems, were just as chaotic neutral in 500 BCE as they are today. Then you hear another uproar. Pigs. A whole group of them snuffling through refuse, grunting loudly as they hunt for scraps thrown out earlier by vendors or tavern kitchens. They shove pottery, tip baskets, and somehow manage to produce a smell that travels faster than the wind. And this brings us nicely to the quirky tidbit of the night. Pigs weren't just tolerated. They were part of the sanitation system. Cities used them like biological garbage trucks. They ate food waste, kept streets relatively cleaner, and made sleeping impossible. As you watch them feast noisily, one pig bumps into another. The offended pig squeals like it just received an insult of political magnitude. Nearby dogs join the noise because dogs love a drama they don't understand. Layers of sound build around you. Barking, braying, grunting, clucking. Bells from donkey harnesses and the occasional angry goose. Yes, a goose. The creature hisses at you like it knows your insecurities. You take a respectful step back. Joke number 2. You mentally note that no ancient thief ever made it past a goose without regretting their life choices. Historians still argue whether animals roamed freely because the cities couldn't control them or because people simply didn't mind the noise. Some evidence suggests laws existed to restrict animals at night, but enforcement was spotty. After all, when half the police force was busy yelling the time, "You'll meet them later," there wasn't much bandwidth left for wrangling pigs. As you continue forward, something else becomes clear. Animals owned the soundscape. Their calls bounced off stone walls, creating echoes that seemed to come from every direction at once. A dog barked 2 streets over and you'd swear it was right behind you. A donkey brayed by the river, and somehow it echoed into your ear like a personal message. Stone cities acted like enormous amplifiers, an acoustic nightmare for anyone who valued peace. And animals weren't just loud, they were busy. Oxen pulled loads at night to avoid daytime heat. Donkeys carried amphorae to taverns still serving customers. Dogs scavenged and fought over scraps. Birds squabbled over rooftops. Rats, yes, they were here too, scurried through alleys, making tiny skittering sounds you'd prefer not to think about. You pause when you hear beating wings. A sudden flurry overhead as a group of pigeons erupts from a ledge, startled by who knows what. The sound is surprisingly loud, like someone shaking a bag of paper fans. One pigeon circles, lands, and immediately coos at a volume that suggests it's trying to start a conversation with the whole city. Up ahead, a family leads a pair of goats home, tugging them by ropes while the goats protest the very concept of direction. Their bleats echo through the alley. A nearby resident leans out a window and shouts for quiet, which is ironic, because his shouting becomes the loudest sound so far. And in the middle of all this, a rooster announces dawn, even though dawn is nowhere near. Roosters in ancient cities didn't follow sunrise, they followed vibes. Joke number 3. This one seems especially proud of its commitment to inaccurate scheduling. You finally reach a quieter corner, or so you think, when a pack of dogs erupts into sudden barking. They found something, You don't want to know what. They chase it down the street, nails clicking on stone, tails wagging wildly, their barks bouncing off every surface. And then you feel it. The city is alive, not metaphorically, literally alive, pulsing with animal energy. Ancient cities weren't sterile roads and silent nights. They were ecosystems, loud, messy, and completely unfiltered. You continue walking, the animal chorus fading but still present, echoing just enough to remind you that the night has other plans, and you already sense that the next noise up ahead won't be hooves or dogs or feathered chaos. It'll be something far more human and much, much louder. You step away from the churning animal chaos, hoping, naively, that the next stretch of night might finally be gentle. Maybe a quiet street, a whisper of wind, a moment where nothing is actively yelling at you. But the city has other ideas, because now you hear it. A rattling, groaning, teeth-grinding screech that makes you wonder if Zeus is dragging furniture across the sky. It gets louder, sharper, more metallic. You turn a corner and see the culprit wobbling toward you, a heavy wooden cart rolling over stone pavement, each wheel complaining like it's filing a formal protest with the universe. Welcome to the nighttime soundtrack of ancient cities, carts, wheels, and pure wooden mayhem. The cart rolling toward you is piled with amphora, long jars filled with oil or wine. The driver trudges behind it, urging the donkey forward while occasionally slapping the cart frame with a stick to shift its weight. Each slap sends a shiver through the wooden joints. The wheels, banded with iron, scrape the roads in aching cries, like metal being pulled across stone. It's a noise you feel in your molars. A mainstream historical fact anchors this chaos. Many cities banned daytime cart traffic. Rome is the classic example. Heavy wagons were prohibited from moving through the city centre during daylight because they clogged the roads and irritated senators. So deliveries happened at night. All of them. Grain, stones, amphorae, firewood, produce, trash removal, everything rolled in darkness. Which meant nights were filled with carts shaking the city awake, one thunderous axle at a time. Another cart turns into the street behind you, this one loaded with rough-cut lumber. The logs thump with every bump, sending vibrations through the wagon. The ox pulling it snorts loudly, blowing clouds of steam into the night air. The driver mutters curses at the road, at the cart, at the universe. You sympathize. Then you hear another cart coming from the opposite direction, and another, and another. It's practically rush hour, except the only lights come from torches, and the only traffic signals are shouted curses, and whoever yells loudest wins. The quirky tidbit for this section jogs into view when you spot a small crew repairing a wheel with nothing but rope, wedges, and pure optimism. Ancient sources describe a real thing called wheel songs, chants spoken by cart drivers to keep pace while shifting loads or repairing wheels mid-trip. You hear it. Now, a rhythmic hum, repeated lines that sound almost like a lullaby. If lullabies were designed to prevent catastrophic axle failure. You press yourself against a wall as two wagons try to squeeze past each other in a street clearly designed by someone who thought wheels were a passing fad. The drivers shout instructions, insults, and navigational advice that definitely wasn't asked for. One raises a lantern, inspecting a wheel that looks painfully close to giving up. Historians still argue whether ancient wheels broke constantly, or if that's just the impression left by writers who loved complaining. The truth probably lies somewhere between wheels were sturdy and roads were terrible. A mule cart passes close by, its side planks rattling wildly. The mule glances at you with deep judgment, as if saying, "Why are you awake?" before continuing its slow, steady, extremely loud journey. The noise is everywhere. Wooden axles creak under strain, loads shift with dull thuds, metal rims scrape stone, ropes tighten and snap, oxen grunt, donkeys bray, drivers shout directions, "Left!" warnings, "Move!" and very clear frustration. "Oh, come on!" Then there's the dust. Carts don't just make noise, they drag half the street with them. Dust rises in gentle clouds, illuminated in the lamplight like ghostly fog. You inhale and immediately wish you hadn't. Joke number 1. You cough so loudly that a passing cat stares at you like you're interrupting its peaceful night. One wagon stops abruptly, forcing the driver to inspect a wheel. He squats, pokes the axle, then slaps the wood affectionately, as if praising it for not breaking yet. A second man joins and they begin arguing about how much weight it can hold. You catch fragments. It'll last one more trip. No, it won't. I'm telling you, this wheel was made by my cousin, which if anything makes you trust it less. You squeeze past them, careful not to get clipped by a protruding plank. The street widens slightly, giving you a moment to breathe. You can still hear the distant rumble of carts behind you, but now another sound joins them, banging from above. You look up. Someone is hauling goods to an upper floor using a rope and pulley. A crate bangs against the building with every pull. The person doing the hauling grunts loudly, not even attempting stealth. Items clatter inside the crate. Something rolls out of it. Someone curses, someone else laughs, and somewhere a rooster crows again, because why not? More carts approach. You marvel at the sheer volume of nighttime traffic. In a world without engines, wheels were everything. Transport, supply lines, construction, sanitation. And they didn't wait for morning. Joke number 2 arrives as a small hand cart whizzes past you, pushed by a teenager who looks dangerously proud of his speed. The cart's wheels screech so loudly you swear the gods themselves winced. He shouts, "Fast! Delivery!" as he disappears into the night, nearly running over a man carrying loaves of bread. You continue walking as 2 ox carts approach side by side, creating what can only be described as ancient gridlock. The drivers argue loudly, each blaming the other for taking the wrong angle. The oxen stand unimpressed, chewing thoughtfully like philosophers watching children bicker. Another mainstream detail hits. Wheels amplified sound far more than footsteps. Because they didn't roll smoothly, they bounced, scraped, clattered, and echoed. Stone streets acted like drums, and cities packed with stone walls turned every alley into an acoustic amplifier. Even a single cart miles away could echo between buildings until it sounded like it was beside you. Which brings you to joke number 3. You start hearing phantom wheels everywhere, like when you leave a concert and the music keeps ringing in your ears. Only this time, it's wooden trauma. As you push farther, the road descends toward a small plaza. More carts gather here, parked temporarily while drivers unload. Workers heave crates onto their backs. Amphorae clink. Ropes groan. A donkey loudly protests the concept of gravity. The whole square buzzes with nocturnal movement. And then, finally, as you slip into a quieter lane, the clatter begins to fade. But you know it's not gone. It's just around the corner, always rolling, always echoing, always threatening to wake up the entire city. And you're only just beginning to understand how impossible sleep truly was in these ancient streets. You leave the rumbling cart traffic behind, brushing dust from your clothes and hoping, really hoping that the city will finally grant you a pocket of quiet. But hope is a fragile thing in an ancient metropolis, because as soon as you turn into the next district, a new wave of sound hits you, sharp and metallic like the city is forging its own heartbeat. The workshops are awake. You feel the first vibration before you fully hear it, a faint tremor through the stone beneath your feet. Then the hammering starts, rhythmic, relentless, like thunder in miniature. You follow the noise until you reach a blacksmith's workshop glowing from within like a furnace. Sparks burst out the doorway every few seconds as someone beats red-hot metal on an anvil with the energy of a man who has chosen violence as a career path. A mainstream historical fact slips into place. Ancient cities depended heavily on nighttime labour. Blacksmiths, potters, millers and bakers often worked after sunset because demand never stopped. Daytime heat was unbearable, and many trades required constant firing, grinding or heating. Some jobs had to continue through the night to meet the needs of thousands of residents, which means that even at this hour the city's forges are waking up, not winding down. You step closer to the blacksmith's door. Inside, a man swings his hammer with practiced precision. The clang echoes down the entire street, bouncing off walls and ricocheting into alleys like a weaponized bell. Every strike sends a jolt up your spine. The smith barely notices. He's done this so long that he probably hears silence as a threat. He plunges the glowing metal into water. The hiss is violent, sending steam swirling into the room. You take one reflexive step back, eyes watering from the heat. And as you do, a potter's workshop next door erupts with the sound of clay pots clattering as they're stacked and sorted. Two workers move quickly, passing shelves of unfired pieces, their movements efficient but absolutely not quiet. The quirky tidbit for this section arrives as you peer through another doorway. Ancient bakers often started working at absurdly early hours, sometimes midnight or before, to have fresh bread ready at dawn. Their ovens roared all night, and the rhythmic thump of kneading dough became part of the nocturnal soundtrack. In some cities, neighbours complained about bakers who stamped and shouted while preparing dough, which sounds like the ancient version of heavy metal bread making. A baker nearby proves the point. He slaps dough onto a table with such force you're convinced it wronged him personally. His apprentice sings loudly while grinding grain. The millstone groans in a slow, scraping rhythm, like a giant complaining about waking up early. The pair work with the focus of people who will be feeding half the district tomorrow, and letting half the district hear it tonight. Historians still argue whether these nighttime workshops were officially scheduled or simply tolerated chaos. Some evidence suggests cities attempted curfews for noise-heavy crafts. Other writings imply nobody cared, as long as productivity stayed high. The debate continues, but tonight the city feels firmly on the let them hammer side. You wander deeper and the sounds multiply. A leather worker snaps hides, the whip-like crack echoing across the courtyard. A carpenter saws wood with long, gritty strokes that make your teeth clench. A stonecutter chips away at a block, each tap producing tiny echoes that stack together into a staccato rhythm. You hear water wheels turning in the distance, grinding grain, powering workshops, whining like tired giants. Joke number 1 hits when a potter steps outside, covered head to toe in drying clay, sighs dramatically and mutters, "I just cleaned this robe." The robe is beyond saving. The clay is winning. You salute him silently. Farther in, you spot what looks like a textile workshop. Women sit around a courtyard lit by a single lamp, spinning fibres and beating looms. The wooden looms make loud, taut thumps, like distant drum beats. The spinning wheels hum. Their voices overlay the noise. Soft gossip, sharp laughter, and the occasional "no, that's not how you dye this." You pause, taking in the chaos. Every direction holds a different craft. Every craft has its own rhythm, and every rhythm overlaps with the others until the entire district becomes a layered symphony of production. It's almost impressive. Almost. But if you lived here, you'd be stuffing wool into your ears nightly. Someone yells something from inside a metalworking shop. There's a crash, a swear, a noise like someone just dropped 12 tools on 12 other tools, then laughter, proving the injury was minor and the embarrassment major. Joke number 2 emerges as you watch an apprentice sweeping the workshop floor, only to realise he's sweeping directly into the street, meaning the entire alley now smells like burnt metal, dust and regret. He shrugs at you as if to say, "Gravity did this, not me." You continue wandering, noting how the workshops form a strange contrast with the dark sky above. Most of them burn with orange or red glows from furnaces, lamps or ovens. The buildings look alive, breathing heat, exhaling steam, grunting through their tools. The city isn't merely awake, it's working. Another mainstream fact rises. Many ancient cities relied on nighttime milling. In Rome, water mills near the Tiber thumped and ground grain all night long. Even hand mills, turned by workers or animals, operated late, sending their groaning, scraping sounds through thin walls. Sleep was optional. Bread was essential. You hear one now. A hand mill spins nearby as a man uses both arms to turn it. The grain grinds with a low rumble that carries down the corridor like distant thunder. Each revolution ends with a light thunk as kernels crack. It's steady, almost hypnotic, until the worker groans loudly and ruins the trance. Historians debate the layout of workshop districts. Were they clustered intentionally, or did chaos simply concentrate where it pleased? You're leaning toward chaos. Organised chaos maybe, but definitely the kind that doesn't care about your sleep schedule. Your final light joke comes when you pass a bronze caster who is clearly explaining something important to his assistant, gesturing passionately while accidentally waving around a ladle full of molten metal. You instinctively duck. The assistant ducks. Even the gods probably duck. You continue, moving past the last of the hammering, the clattering, the scraping, the slapping. The workshop district fades behind you, but its echo lingers like a phantom vibration in your bones. And as you walk into a slightly darker, quieter street, you realise something unsettling. This wasn't the loudest part of the night. Not even close. You've barely escaped the furnace-bright workshop district when the night air changes again. Not quieter, just different. The clanging fades, the sawdust settles from your clothes, and for a moment you enjoy a tiny slice of calm. But then you hear a sound that is unmistakable, unavoidable, and absolutely designed to ruin sleep for anyone within a 10-block radius. A metallic clang. Then another, followed by a voice shouting something official at a volume that implies the listener is on the opposite side of the continent. The night watch is making its rounds. You step into a wider intersection just as two watchmen appear, torches raised high, spears in hand, lanterns swinging from their belts. Their sandals slap the pavement with brisk, authoritative rhythm. Every 5 or 6 steps, one of them bangs his spear against a bronze plate hanging from his belt, sending a sharp ring slicing through the night air. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. In many ancient cities, night watch patrols served as both guardians and walking public announcements. They checked for fires, thieves, fights, curfew breakers, and anything suspicious enough to shout about, which in their opinion was nearly everything. They marked the hours with shouts or drum beats, turning the entire city into a giant, unwilling clock. One guard stops in the middle of the street, lifts his torch, and bellows the time. His colleague echoes him down the alley. The sound ricochets through stone walls like a divine alarm system. You wince. Birds scatter. A nearby donkey reacts as though personally offended. You follow them at a distance, trying not to look like someone suspicious. Unfortunately, everyone looks suspicious at night, especially people walking quietly, so one guard squints at you, eyes narrowed like he's mentally drafting paperwork. After a tense moment, he decides you're harmless. Joke number 1. You breathe a sigh of relief loud enough to qualify as its own noise violation. The watch continues, their torchlight glinting off doorways and windows. They peer into alleys. They nudge sleeping drunks toward home. They shout warnings to anyone carrying a bag that looks even remotely stealable. One guard kicks a stray jug out of the street with absolutely zero subtlety. It clatters, spins, and rolls downhill like a wooden bowling ball. Then you hear something new, a low drum beat. You follow the sound and discover another pair of watchmen stationed at a crossroads. One beats a small drum while the other chants an announcement about keeping lamps lit, minding valuables, and reporting suspicious activity. The drum is surprisingly loud for its size, thudding through the silence like a heartbeat amplified by stone. This ties into your quirky tidbit. Some ancient watch units marked the changing watches of the night with instruments, drums, gongs, wooden clappers, even early bells. These weren't gentle cues for sleepy citizens. They were loud enough to be heard across entire districts. In some Chinese cities, night watchmen carried bamboo clappers and snapped them rhythmically as they walked, producing a distinctive tock-tock-tock all night long. The idea was safety. The side effect was insomnia. Historians still argue whether these watch patrols genuinely made cities safer, or simply louder. Some say the noise deterred criminals and kept workers alert. Others argue that thieves knew the watch routes, so the noise merely served as a moving advertisement for where the guards weren't. Tonight, walking with them, you can imagine both interpretations being true. The watchmen keep up their patrol, calling out hazards as they spot them. Loose shutter, unattended fire lamp, suspicious noise in the alley, drunk man sleeping in a barrel. You glance. It is indeed a drunk man sleeping in a barrel. One guard pokes the man gently with his spear butt, mumbling something about civic responsibility. The drunk man mutters happily and refuses to wake. The guard sighs, then drags the barrel a few feet out of the road. This is apparently enough. As you continue, the night watch does what the night watch does best. Make noise without apology. A guard tests a door latch, loudly. Another checks a ladder propped against a house, louder. One taps a shield with his knuckles, loudest. If there was ever a contest for least stealthy patrol in human history, these men would win unanimously. Joke number 2 arrives when one guard accidentally drops his lantern. It bounces once, twice, and miraculously doesn't break. The guard immediately looks around to see if anyone witnessed this embarrassment. You absolutely did. You pretend you didn't. Up ahead, the watch stops at a crossroads shrine. They make a small offering, just a pinch of grain, then strike the shrine's bronze bell to signal their passage. The bell rings out in a shimmering wave that travels down the entire boulevard, waking up 3 dogs, 1 baby, and at least 2 extremely annoyed residents. A woman leans out her window and yells something unfriendly. The watch thanks her for her concern and moves on. You trail them until the street narrows. Here, the patrol slows, listening carefully for trouble. A muffled argument echoes from a house nearby. Raised voices, thumping footsteps, the clatter of something falling over. The guards pause, exchange looks, then shrug. One mutters, "Domestic matters." Translation, "Not their problem tonight." Another alley brings you face to face with a man carrying a torch whose entire job seems to be lighting lamps along the street. Every time he trims a wick or refills an oil cup, he mutters complaints at full volume. When he reaches a lamp that refuses to ignite, he curses it so passionately you think he might duel it. Joke number 3, the lamp wins by continuing to not light. As you leave the patrol behind, the night watcher's shouts fade into distance, but not very far. Their echoes follow you like persistent reminders that the city never truly stops announcing itself. And as you turn into a smaller alley, ready to take a break from official noise, new sounds begin rising from the darkness. Soft conversations, creaking floors, babies crying, snoring, arguments, because now you're entering the part of the city where people live, stacked on top of each other, separated by walls thinner than your patience, and the night is only getting louder. You walk away from the watch patrol, ears still ringing from their heroic commitment to being as unsneaky as humanly possible. The street narrows again, twisting into a lane bordered by tall, leaning buildings. Windows jut out overhead like crooked eyebrows. Fabric shutters flutter in the breeze, and instantly, you feel it. This is where people actually live. Which means this is where the real nighttime noise happens. You take a few steps forward and sound begins leaking from every direction. A distant conversation here, a thump there, forks clinking, someone coughing, someone laughing, a baby wailing with the lungs of a champion. This is the city's shared heartbeat. The collective, unfiltered noise of thousands of people stacked together with zero insulation. Modern apartments whisper by comparison. A mainstream historical fact rises with perfect timing. Ancient cities were packed, insanely packed, into dense blocks of multi-story housing called insulae, especially in Rome. These buildings were often poorly made, with thin walls, wooden floors, and shared staircases. Privacy was theoretical. Sound travelled through them like water through a cracked jar. You step beneath one such insula now. The building leans slightly over the street, supported by beams that look like they're holding it up out of spite. Every floor is alive with noise. On the first level, you hear a couple bickering about chores. The argument stops, resumes, escalates, and pauses again when a pot clatters to the floor. Someone upstairs shouts down, "Quiet!" which is deeply ironic because he shouts it at full volume. Above that, a baby cries, loudly, persistently, and with impressive technique. The wail echoes through the stairwell. You wince sympathetically. A woman's voice follows, "Go back to sleep." The baby respectfully declines. You glance up and notice a basket being lowered by rope from a top-floor window. A neighbour below deposits 2 loaves of bread, ties a knot, and sends it back up. This ancient elevator clunks and squeaks with every movement. One rope fibre snaps loudly, causing the woman above to gasp. Joke number 1, she immediately yells at the rope as if it were the one slacking on repairs. You move forward, trying to find a patch of quiet, but the city is generous only with noise. A door swings open beside you and a man steps out carrying a chamber pot. He dumps it into the gutter with a splash you did not want to hear at this hour. He yawns, scratches his head, and goes back inside, unaware he has committed an auditory war crime. Inside another home you hear the rhythmic squeak of a wooden bed frame. You don't linger. Then, overhead, a clatter. Someone drops something. It thuds, bounces, and then rolls across the entire floor like a rogue marble determined to make friends in every apartment. You look up instinctively, even though the object is contained. The whole building shakes slightly in sympathy. The quirky tidbit of the night slips into place. Ancient insulae often had shared courtyards where residents cooked, washed clothes, fetched water, argued loudly, raised chickens, or gossiped with zero volume control. At night, these courtyards became echo chambers. A whisper turned into a broadcast. A single cough became the neighbourhood soundtrack. You peer into one now. A woman is doing late-night laundry, slapping wet clothes against a stone. Smack, smack, smack. Her motions are precise, like she's punishing the fabric. A neighbour leans out and says something sarcastic. They argue for a moment, then laugh, then argue again. It's a whole emotional arc in 45 seconds. Historians still argue whether insular living fostered community closeness or chronic irritation. Some say neighbours were basically family, sharing daily life intimately. Others point out that ancient moralists complained constantly about noise, fights, shared smells, and people stomping on upper floors like furious elephants. The truth is likely both, intimate bonds mixed with daily sensory warfare. You keep walking and nearly trip over a child sitting on the stoop. He holds a small clay toy, something like a spinning top, that hums as he plays with it. The noise is tiny but persistent. He doesn't even look at you, too focused on becoming the world's smallest nighttime DJ. Farther up in a window, someone snores. Not just any snore, a monumental snore, a heroic, deep, rumbling sound that shakes shutters. You look for the source, half expecting to see a bear. Instead, it's a thin man asleep in an open window, mouth wide, chest rising and falling like a misplaced tuba. Joke number 2. A pigeon next to him looks offended by the competition. Below him, another window bursts open. A woman yells, "Stop singing!" You listen carefully. There was no singing. There is singing now because the neighbour begins loudly singing out of spite. Your senses fill with more noise than should be scientifically possible. The creak of a stairway, a spoon stirring a pot, a cat knocking something over, 2 men playing a game of knucklebones on a table shouting triumphantly, someone feeding pigeons despite the pigeons screeching like feathered demons. You glance upward again, and you see yet another common thing. Open windows everywhere, with fabric curtains billowing in the breeze. Ancient apartments trapped heat like ovens, so people left windows open all night, which meant every conversation, every laugh, every complaint, every clatter of pottery spilled freely into the street below. Footsteps echo overhead as someone walks across the wooden upper floor. The boards creak loudly, then louder, then much louder when a heavy object drops. You decide not to stand under that part of the building. Joke number 3 arrives when a resident tosses a bucket of water over the edge. Not at you, thankfully, but at a cat stealing fish from a windowsill. The cat screams in outrage, sprints off and knocks over 2 baskets on its way out. You move deeper, passing another courtyard where someone is practicing a musical instrument. Badly. It might be a flute. It might be a crime. You'll never know. And then you realise something profound. Inside these narrow streets, stacked homes, thin walls and sleepless families, silence was impossible. This wasn't a bug in ancient city life. It was the default setting. You continue into the maze, surrounded by voices, footsteps, creaking floors and distant laughter, and you know the night will only get louder from here. You finally slip out of the residential maze, ears ringing from the combined sounds of stomping floors, screaming goats, heroic snoring, and neighbours arguing with the confidence of seasoned philosophers. The street widens again, the air opens up, and for a brief, beautiful moment you think, maybe the worst is over. But then you hear splashing, then voices, then the unmistakable sound of someone dropping a wooden bucket with enough force to wake Tutankhamun. You've reached the nighttime baths. You move toward a long, low building glowing with lamplight and steam. People drift in and out like it's a social club that forgot to close. And in a way it is. Public baths were essential. Hubs of hygiene, gossip, business deals, flirting, feuds, and deeply questionable singing. And yes, many of them stayed open late into the night. A mainstream historical fact hits immediately. Evening bathing was extremely common in ancient Roman and Near Eastern cities. The heat of the day made bathing before bed appealing, and many labourers couldn't visit the baths earlier because they worked sunrise to sunset. So nighttime became prime bath time, which means the baths are never quiet. You step inside, and the noise hits like humid thunder. Voices bouncing off tile, laughter ricocheting through steam-filled halls, water sloshing, splashing, dripping, pouring, scrapers clacking as men clean their skin, heated arguments rising and falling like musical crescendos. It's chaotic, warm, and absolutely not the place to find peace. The first thing that hits your senses is the smell, a mixture of warm water, oils, herbs, and the faint edge of old steam. Not bad, just strong. Torchlight dances off marble walls, turning the air golden, and everywhere you look, someone is doing something loudly. A man stomps into the pool, sending a wave across the bath that smacks into the wall with a slap. Another vigorously scrubs his arms, grunting like he's fighting a large enemy. A third tells a story so dramatically he splashes the water every time he gestures. Your first light joke, a guy near the edge keeps dunking himself underwater, popping up each time with a gasp like he's being reborn. His friend, unimpressed, tells him he looks like a confused dolphin. You look around and realise something. The acoustics in ancient baths were engineered to trap sound. The domed ceilings, tiled walls, and echoing chambers made even the quietest drip echo like a drumbeat. One dropped bucket could send vibrations reverberating for half a minute. Right on cue, someone drops a bucket. It bounces, it rolls, it spins, it knocks into another bucket. A chain reaction of wooden chaos ensues. Everyone reacts. Some laugh, some shout. A few stare in resigned despair. You simply step back to avoid splash collateral. The quirky tidbit for this section emerges when you notice workers near the furnace room shoveling wood into a massive hippocaust, an underfloor heating system that keeps the water warm. The fire roars, crackles, and occasionally pops loudly enough to make several bathers jump. These furnaces ran constantly and created a low rumbling sound beneath the floor, like the city was purring or growling. Historians still argue whether nighttime baths were peaceful escapes for workers or rowdy social events. Some ancient writers describe them as relaxing, soothing, and therapeutic. Others depict them as noisy, crowded, slippery gathering spots where arguments broke out, children splashed strangers, and everyone talked at once. Tonight's atmosphere leans heavily toward the public chaos with some warm water added side. A group of old men sits near the warm pool, debating politics with the seriousness of senators and the volume of auctioneers. One slams his hand on the water to emphasize a point, creating an enormous splash he absolutely did not intend. Joke number 2. He looks genuinely offended at the water for betraying him. Nearby, 2 teenagers challenge each other to see who can hold their breath longest. They dunk themselves under and immediately start kicking each other in a way that is technically friendly, but extremely noisy. Their mothers shout from the side, demanding they stop. They do not stop. Someone else laughs so loudly you swear it echoes into the next district. Another man performs a dramatic stretch that cracks his back like a row of firecrackers, earning impressed but horrified stares from everyone around him. Then you hear a different sound, chatter rising into song. A group of bathers in the corner begins singing a tune that sounds suspiciously improvised. Within seconds, half the room joins in, some in harmony, most not. The song grows louder, echoing wildly. Someone claps, someone else tries to beat rhythm on the wall. The result is not musical. You back away slowly. Dripping water from overhead troughs creates a background rhythm. The hollow gurgle of drains pulls water down stone. Channels. A worker scrapes the floor with a squeegee-like tool, the scraping noise sharp enough to slice through the chatter. And you notice something else. The baths make people bold. They shout across rooms. They laugh with their whole bodies. They complain loudly. They greet friends at maximum volume. Warm water turns everyone into extroverts. Just as you prepare to leave, one final spectacle occurs. A very confident man decides to leap into the main pool. He shouts something about glorious entrance, takes a running start and jumps. The splash is so massive that it drenches half the room. The reaction is immediate. Gasps, laughter, curses, applause. Joke number 3. One man looks so offended you'd think he'd been splashed with boiling oil. You step out of the baths, dripping only slightly into cooler air. The noise fades, but not entirely. Voices continue rising from inside, muffled but constant. And as you continue onward, the city feels more alive than ever. Because if this is what people sound like relaxing, imagine what they sound like when they're praying. You're heading toward the temples next, and they don't believe in quiet devotion. You leave the steamy bathhouse behind, clothes sticking slightly to your skin, ears buzzing from the combined splash-shout bucket-dropping orchestra still echoing behind you. For a moment, the night air feels cleaner, cooler, calmer. You breathe in and savor the quiet, until you realize it's not actually quiet. Far ahead, Drifting through the darkness like a slow, pulsing heartbeat, you hear a low chant, then a drum, then two drums, then the unmistakable wail of something that absolutely isn't a flute but desperately wants to be. You follow the sound because at this point you've accepted the city won't let you ignore it, and soon you arrive at one of the most unexpectedly loud nighttime forces in the ancient world. Sacred rituals. You approach a large temple built of dark stone, its columns lit by oil lamps flickering like dancing spirits. A crowd is gathered outside, some praying, some chanting, some just spectating because this is the ancient equivalent of live entertainment. The night glows with flame and echoes with devotion that definitely wasn't designed for sleep. A mainstream historical fact sets the stage. Many ancient religions held nighttime ceremonies, offerings, processions, laments, praises, healings, oracles and festivals. Some were scheduled, some were spontaneous, all were loud. Priests beat drums, worshippers sang. Musicians played reed pipes with the confidence of professionals and the pitch accuracy of amateurs. Rituals could fill entire districts with sacred noise. You get closer and see a procession forming around the temple's entrance. People carry torches, their flames crackling. Several hold small bronze bells they ring rhythmically. A priest steps forward and shakes a sistrum, a sacred rattle used in rituals, creating a high, shimmering metallic buzz that vibrates in your jaw. A woman beside you whispers, "They're calling the goddess." Based on the noise level, the goddess could probably hear them from orbit. Inside the temple, the chanting grows louder, reverberating through the stone. Priests strike drums with steady force, others clap rhythmically. A group of children sings a simple phrase on loop, slightly off-key but enthusiastic. The crowd responds with antiphonal shouting that rises and falls like waves. The quirky tidbit of the night emerges as you spot a musician blowing into a double reed instrument. It produces a sound that can best be described as an ancient duck being encouraged to sing opera. This is the orloz, a traditional instrument beloved by many ancient cultures and famous for being extremely, gloriously loud. Some depictions even show players wearing a leather strap around their head to keep their cheeks from exploding under the pressure. You feel that, emotionally and physically. A priest walks past carrying a large bowl of burning incense. The smoke spirals through the air, thick and fragrant, sweet resin mixed with something earthy. As he swings it, gently, ashes crackle and pop, sending sparks upward. The scent fills your lungs, almost masking the smell of sweat, oil lamps, and the lingering bathhouse humidity clinging to your clothes. Suddenly the drumming shifts into a faster rhythm. The crowd reacts, hands raise, voices rise. Someone starts singing loudly in a tone that suggests he believes volume increases divine favor. The chant swells into a collective roar, devotional but absolutely not sleep-friendly. Historians still argue whether these nighttime rituals were community bonding events or government-sanctioned sleep deprivation. Some sources say they brought neighborhoods together in shared worship. Others complain bitterly about noisy priests performing endless nighttime rites. The truth probably depended on whether you were inside the ceremony or trying to sleep 3 streets away. As the ritual intensifies, you spot a man approaching the temple stairs holding a small drum. He's clearly late, jogging, out of breath, hair a mess. He jumps into the circle of musicians and starts drumming wildly, desperately trying to catch up to the rhythm. Joke number 1, he is not catching up. He is, in fact, making his own rhythm and hoping nobody notices. The chanting suddenly shifts into a call and response pattern. A priest calls out a phrase and the crowd answers in unison. You can't understand the language, but the confidence behind every syllable could persuade you to pay temple taxes twice. Nearby, 2 older women clap on the offbeats, absolutely destroying any rhythmic cohesion. They seem thrilled. You admire their commitment to chaos. Then a second procession enters from your left, dancers wearing lightweight linen garments, moving in slow, sweeping motions, whispering hymns that sound soft individually, but combine into a persistent hiss that slithers through the air. Their bracelets jingle with every step, and then, because rituals love escalation, a group of musicians begins playing conch shells. The sound blasts through the street, bold, brassy, and completely unapologetic. You jump slightly. Joke number 2. You have flashbacks to the tavern trombone singer who couldn't hit a note if it were standing right in front of him holding a sign. A sharp bell rings from inside the temple. Someone shouts an announcement. The crowd gathers closer. A priest raises his hand. The music pauses, briefly, for exactly 2 seconds. Then an enormous bronze gong is struck. Once. Loudly enough to make several nearby donkeys bray in protest. The vibration rolls through your chest like a small earthquake. A man next to you mutters, "Ah, the good part," as though this was ever in question. You try stepping back to avoid the crush, but a woman behind you cheerfully pushes you forward, shouting, "Closer! The goddess can bless you better from here." You politely decline. The goddess can absolutely reach from a distance. Another wave of chanting rises, this time accompanied by rhythmic stomping from the dancers. Dust rises from the ground, torches flare. The air grows hotter, thicker, buzzing with energy that has nothing to do with serenity. Then you catch sight of a child tugging on his mother's sleeve. "Can we go home?" he asks. "When the drums stop," she replies. The drums do not stop. Joke number 3 arrives, courtesy of a man holding a giant ceremonial horn that's clearly too heavy for him. He tries to lift it to his lips, wobbles, almost falls, accidentally toots a note that sounds like a startled cow, and then tries to pretend nothing happened. Everyone saw. Everyone. The ritual continues behind you as you slip away. The percussion fades slowly but not far. Sacred noise travels. Devotion echoes. And as you head deeper into the city, another kind of loud, unpredictable nighttime sound begins rising from the alleys ahead. Arguments, crashes, footsteps running, a shout that does not sound devotional because the night is reaching its most chaotic phase. And crime never believed in bedtime. You leave the temple district behind with your ears still vibrating like someone installed a subwoofer directly inside your skull. The chanting, the drumming, the accidental cow horn solo, it all echoes down the street even as the lamps shrink behind you. You exhale, thinking maybe, you've hit the loudest part of the night. Then something shouts in the distance. Not a priest, not a tavern singer, not a donkey aspiring to opera. This shout is sharp, human, urgent, followed by a crash, then running footsteps, then another shout. Welcome to the nighttime alley chaos of ancient cities, where arguments, thieves, drunk wanderers, and random confrontations ensure that peace remains an unachievable fantasy. You turn into a narrow lane lit by a single flickering torch. The shadows here have depth, layered, restless, alive, and the sounds. Oh, they do not care that you've been awake for 6 hypothetical centuries. Every building seems to be shaking with its own drama. To your left, 2 men argue over something you cannot exactly identify. One is waving a loaf of bread. The other is pointing at a broken jug. Their voices bounce off the walls like they're performing a nighttime tragedy for an audience of confused pigeons. A mainstream historical fact grounds the scene. Ancient cities had notoriously limited police forces, if any existed at all. Most law enforcement came from night watchmen, who shouted more than they intervened, neighbours sticking their heads out to complain, or communities handling disputes themselves. So nighttime arguments were practically background music. You edge past the quarrel. The man with the bread yells, "This was your fault." The man with the jug shouts back, "Your donkey pushed me." You decide this is a conflict best left unresolved for eternity. Farther down, a woman opens a second-story window and throws a bucket of water out into the alley. It splashes across the stones and narrowly misses a man who was absolutely not paying attention. He shouts up in outrage. She shouts back with twice the volume. Joke number 1. He insists she tried to drown him. She insists he should stop walking around like a startled goat. You quietly agree with her. You continue forward as the sounds shift again. A crash comes from a side alley. Something, or someone, knocks over a pile of amphorae. Clay shatters, echoing like a chaotic wind chime. A drunk voice announces, "I didn't do that," which is, of course, exactly what someone who absolutely did do that would say. This leads you into the territory of ancient nightlife that no guidebook ever sugarcoated. Thieves, pickpockets, and opportunists roamed after dark. Night was their playground, and with most streets unlit except for scattered torches, shadows became perfect hiding places. A figure darts past you, hooded, quick, silent except for the faint tap of sandals. Someone behind him yells, "Stop him!" The figure does not stop. The person yelling does not chase. This is ancient city justice in its most relaxed form. As you turn a corner, you stumble upon another commotion. A group of young men are loudly debating, a word here meaning trying to sound philosophical while slurring. They push each other, argue about racing odds, and occasionally stop to compliment each other's hair. One suddenly lunges forward, hugs his friend, and cries, "You're like a brother to me." The friend responds, "We are brothers." Joke number 2. The emotional revelation is instantly forgotten as they start arguing again. A few steps further and you hear a crash from inside a home, something heavy falling over. A woman's voice follows, "I told you not to step on that." A man replies defensively, "It moved by itself." You assume it did not. Through an open doorway you glimpse a table knocked sideways, a clay bowl shattered, and a cat sitting in the middle of it, all looking extremely guilty. The couple argues at high volume while the cat pretends to examine a wall, deeply invested in its innocence. Nighttime chaos wasn't limited to drunk humans and mischievous animals. There were also the genuine dangers of the ancient world: robbery, brawls, disputes turning violent. But equally common were petty frustrations, loud misunderstandings, and spontaneous eruptions of noise that meant nothing except someone is awake, irritated, and way too loud. Suddenly another argument ignites behind you, this one louder, sharper. Two neighbours stand on their respective balconies shouting insults across the narrow street. You can't understand the dialect, but based on the hand gestures, the debate involves someone's donkey, someone else's laundry, someone's visiting cousin, and perhaps the moral integrity of 3 generations of ancestors. Historians still argue whether ancient neighbourhoods were more close-knit or more prone to conflict than modern ones. Some evidence suggests people genuinely relied heavily on their neighbours. Other sources paint a picture of endless quarrels, shouted grievances, and late-night feuds audible from miles away. Tonight, definitely the quarrelsome version. A loud metallic clang erupts nearby. You whirl around and spot a man hammering at a door latch, muttering foul things about its craftsmanship. He stops, shakes the latch, hammers again, shakes it, hammers again. You don't think the latch is the problem. You think the universe is. Then another voice rises, this time soft, frantic. A woman is calling for her son, who wandered off chasing a stray dog. Within seconds, 3 neighbours join in, shouting his name across alleys with enough volume to locate him, even if he had wandered into another country. Thankfully, he emerges from behind a cart holding the dog triumphantly. The dog looks mildly embarrassed. Joke number 3. The mother yells, "Don't ever do that again," and immediately follows it with, "Give the dog some water, he looks tired." You keep walking deeper into the alley system. Somewhere ahead, a tavern leftover spills into the street. 2 men wrestling playfully, neither winning, both loudly insisting they're winning. A crowd forms around them, not helping, just commentating in a way that is both enthusiastic and deeply unhelpful. Someone yells betting odds. Someone else shouts, "Careful of the pottery." Immediately pottery breaks. This is nighttime urban life. Messy, emotional, loud, and always on the verge of turning into a full musical number if one person starts clapping in rhythm. You finally exit the cluster of arguments and commotions, stepping onto a quieter street. The echoes fade slightly behind you, but up ahead, you hear sweeping, dragging, clinking crates, the unmistakable sound of people setting up shop. Because while most of the city is trying and failing to sleep, another group is already preparing for tomorrow. The markets are waking up. You follow the sound of sweeping like a strange kind of lullaby, if lullabies were made of scratchy bristles on stone, and someone muttering about how nobody appreciates their work. The shouting from the alleys fades behind you, and a new tone creeps into the night. Not chaotic, not drunk, not devotional, just busy. You turn into a broader street and there it is. The market district, halfway between asleep and awake. Stalls stand like skeletons, bare frames, empty counters, awnings still rolled up. But the people, they're already moving, hauling, dragging, sweeping, muttering, preparing for a day that hasn't even arrived yet. The sky above is still dark, just beginning to pale at the horizon. Everyone sensible is in bed. You, unfortunately, are here. A man in a wool tunic pushes a broom made of bundled twigs across the stone, scraping up yesterday's dust, dropped grain, and the ghosts of 1,000 crushed figs. The sound is harsh, but oddly rhythmic. Shirk, shirk, shirk. He pauses, leans on the broom, sighs like the entire economy rests on his spine, then starts again. A mainstream historical fact anchors this scene. In many ancient cities, market workers started well before sunrise. Stalls had to be cleared, swept and stocked, so that when the first rush of buyers arrived, workers grabbing food before their shifts, wealthier customers strolling in later, everything was ready. That meant porters, cleaners, and stall keepers were already hours into their day while the rest of the city snored. You watch a pair of porters drag a crate between them, its wooden bottom scraping along the stones with a deep, complaining growl. One of them grunts, "Lift? Don't drag." The other replies, "It's too early for lifting." Joke number one, neither of them adjust their technique. Nearby, a woman unrolls the awning of her stall with practice flicks. The fabric flaps down, puffing a small cloud of dust into her face. She coughs aggressively, then glares at the awning like it personally insulted her. She begins arranging baskets in neat rows, each one thudding onto the counter in a steady beat. Thump, thump, thump. You move through the centre of the square, weaving around piles of empty amphorae, folded mats and bundles of rope. The chandlers, those who sell oil and lamps, are already here, trimming wicks and checking stocks. The fishmongers shuffle in a little slower, carrying baskets that smell like the ocean decided to live in your nostrils rent-free. They slam their baskets on the ground, splash out melted ice or leftover water, and complain loudly about supply prices. A quirky tidbit swims to the surface as you notice a man carefully scattering crushed herbs and fragrant leaves along the ground in front of his stall. In some markets, especially in the Mediterranean and Near East, sellers would sprinkle aromatic plants or sawdust soaked with oils to mask the less pleasant smells of fish, meat, and crowds. It helped with traction on slick stones, and made the air smell slightly more like a festival and slightly less like a flooded butcher shop. One stallkeeper hums a tune as he works, stacking clay cups into a neat pyramid. Another taps on his jars, listening for cracks. A third is already arguing with an invisible customer, rehearsing tomorrow's negotiations at full volume. He gestures dramatically to the empty air. You decide you'd lose an argument to him, even in your imagination. Historians still argue whether these pre-dawn preparations formed a kind of informal social hour for traders, or if they were just grim, sleepy necessity. Some suggest bonds were formed in these quiet hours, shared coffee before coffee existed, shared complaints about taxes and weather. Others point to literary complaints about exhaustion, overwork, and the constant grind. Tonight, the mood seems like a mix of both. Tired bodies, familiar banter. A cart rolls in slowly, the donkey yawning in a way that feels deeply personal. The driver calls out half-heartedly, announcing a delivery of fresh fruit. Several stallkeepers converge, voices layering into negotiations, offers, counter-offers, exaggerated groans and dramatic gasps over the price of figs. You watch as crates are hauled off one by one, each landing on counters with a hollow thud that echoes around the square. Joke number two, one crate splits open, sending pomegranates rolling in every direction. Workers chase them like exhausted beetles while one man calmly picks up a fruit and takes a bite mid-chaos. A boy with a broom, probably apprenticed to someone who forgot that being a child should come with perks like sleep, sweeps debris toward the gutter. He hums, then starts tapping the broom in a pattern, turning his chore into a drum solo against the stone. A nearby vendor yells, "Less music, more sweeping." The boy responds by sweeping more loudly. In one corner of the market, a butcher sharpens his knives against a whetstone. The scraping sound is long, slow, and a little ominous. Shk, shk. He tests the edge of one blade, nods, then continues. The faint metallic ring carries across the square like a very specific kind of alarm clock. You notice how the soundscape here is different from the taverns and temples. It's not wild, not drunken, not ecstatic. It's purposeful, functional, but it's still loud. Crates slam, rope creaks, wooden stands thump into position. Someone hammers a loose peg back into place, another bangs a broken board against a wall, trying to flatten it back into obedience. Shadowy side alleys feed into the market, and from each one more workers emerge, carrying baskets on their backs or balanced perfectly on their heads. They walk with the steady rhythm of people who have done this since childhood. Someone stumbles, a basket tilts, and half a load of onions tumbles out and rolls across the pavement. Everyone groans. Everyone laughs. Everyone yells advice that is 2 centuries too late. Joke number 3. One onion bumps into your shoe and stops there as if asking to be adopted. Closer to the centre, the more prestigious stalls, those selling textiles, spices, perfumes, prepare in quieter but no less distracting ways. A woman shakes out folded fabrics, each flap sounding like a curtain being drawn on sleep. Another opens a chest and lifts out tiny glass bottles, setting them down with soft clinks that somehow carry clearly through the air. A man with a small scale tests it, dropping weights into one pan, letting them clink, adjusting them, repeating the process 3 or 4 times. Each clink is a tiny promise that tomorrow's arguments over fairness will be measured in grams and decibels. You stand in the middle of it all, feeling the tempo of the night shift. While most of the city tosses in bed, grumbling at distant carts and echoing voices, this district hums with a kind of weary determination. The market isn't waking up. At dawn, it's already been awake for hours, and as the first faint hints of dawn colour the sky, the noise doesn't fade, it grows, because soon the harbours will join in, and they make this square sound almost peaceful by comparison. You slip out of the awakening marketplace just as the first hints of dawn brush the horizon. But the city isn't softening, it isn't calming, it isn't winding down. Instead, the noise is shifting once again, growing deeper, rougher, heavier, rolling in like a tide, because you're heading toward the harbour, and ancient harbours did not believe in sleep. Even from several streets away, you feel the sound before you fully hear it. A dull, rhythmic pounding. Ropes hitting wood, boots hitting docks, crates hitting the ground. Then the shouting starts. Orders barked across water, sailors yelling at each other, merchants yelling at sailors yelling back, someone yelling purely for the sport of it. You turn a corner, and suddenly the world opens into a wide, moonlit waterfront. Boats crowd the shore, sleek river vessels, fat cargo ships, fishing boats, ferries, barges. Torches and oil lamps flicker along the docks, glowing on the waves like scattered gold coins. The air is thick with seawater, smoke, wet rope, fish guts, and ambition. A mainstream historical fact sets the tone. Ancient harbours operated around the clock. Ships didn't just arrive at dawn. They came when the currents allowed, when winds shifted, when traders finished deals, when weather permitted. Offloading cargo immediately was essential to avoid rot, theft, spoilage, or fees. So nighttime harbours were some of the noisiest places in the ancient world. And you are walking straight into one. A longshoreman shouts, "Heave!" A dozen men pull on a thick rope dragging a ship closer to the dock. Their sandals slide across wet boards. The rope groans. The hull creaks like a giant complaining about sore joints. One final tug, one final shout, and the ship thuds into place, bumping the dock hard enough to send ripples across the water. You jump slightly. Joke number 1. A nearby sailor sees you flinch and says, "First time?" with the smirk of a man who has flinched every day of his life. The noise multiplies instantly. Sailors drop planks into position, thunk, then stomp across them. Workers carry crates on their backs, grunting with each step, and for a clink as they're unloaded. A merchant argues about quantities. The captain argues about payment. A scribe tries to tally everything while shouting, "Stop moving the crates so fast!" Another ship arrives, this one sliding into the harbour with a soft splash before its crew starts yelling in 3 languages. The confusion is immediate. Left. That is not left. Stop pushing me. That's my barrel. One man carrying 2 baskets nearly collides with a donkey. The donkey brays explosively, startling half the dock. The man curses loudly, loses 1 basket, and watches oranges scatter across the planks. Sailors cheer and begin kicking them back and forth like a casual midnight sport. A quirky tidbit washes ashore as you notice a group of workers chanting in unison. They're syncing their movements as they haul a massive cargo net from the hold of a ship. Many ancient ports used rhythmic chants to coordinate muscle power, pulling ropes, turning capstans, transporting cargo. The result? A kind of maritime music that was less sea shanty and more group yelling with commitment. Nearby, a man repairing a fishing net taps wooden pegs into place. each tap echoing sharply. Another sharpens a knife against a stone. Sparks jump. A pile of oyster shells gets dumped from a basket into a trough with a crash that awakens seagulls perched on the roof. They immediately start squawking, demanding tribute. Historians still argue whether ancient harbours were more chaotic at night or day. Some say nights were calmer because fewer ships arrived. Others say nights were worse because lantern light made everything harder, slower, and therefore louder. The truth seems obvious right now. This harbour is at maximum volume. As you walk further along the dock, you pass fishermen unloading the night's catch. They slap fish onto wooden tables with alarming enthusiasm. A man guts a fish in 3 motions flat, flinging the innards into a bucket with terrible accuracy. Another man yells, "Watch your aim!" and immediately gets splattered anyway. Joke number 2. You take 1 step too close, and a fishtail slaps the ground beside your sandal like a wet warning. Ropes whip through the air as sailors adjust sails, roll up rigging or tie knots with the speed of lifelong practice. Wooden pulleys creak overhead, a bronze bell clanks on a mast, a deckhand trips, sending a coil of rope rolling across the dock like an angry snake. Down the shoreline you spot a group of merchants inspecting ceramic jars, tapping each one to ensure it isn't cracked. Every tap echoes, tock tock tock, turning the dock into a giant percussive instrument. A merchant shakes his head at one jar, mutters something about cheap clay, and tosses it aside. The jar shatters loudly, earning a fresh round of complaints. Even the waves contribute to the soundscape, lapping, slapping, splashing against hulls, docks and pilings. The tide pulls on abandoned debris, dragging it with soft scraping sounds. Water drips from nets. Oars clatter as they're stacked. Chains clang. Crabs click against wooden crates. You shift away from the busiest area and step onto a small pier jutting into the water. The boards creak beneath your weight, a warning of their age. A fisherman nearby sharpens his hook, each scrape echoing in the cool morning air. Then a shout erupts from a nearby ship. "Look out!" Before you can react, 2 men hoist a crate over the railing. One loses his grip. The crate drops, bounces once and splits open, sending grain cascading across the dock. A man screams at the heavens. Another blames the rope. A third tries to salvage the grain and ends up slipping in it. Joke number 3. The man on the ground throws a handful of grain at his friend as revenge, then immediately regrets the decision when pigeons dive-bomb him for snacks. As dawn's glow strengthens, the harbour noise doesn't fade, it multiplies. More ships arrive, more workers file in, more crates hit the ground, more arguments erupt. If anything, the night was merely a warm-up. You stand at the edge of the water, watching the city wake harder than it slept. The harbour is a living, breathing, roaring organism, and yet, even this is only one layer of the urban night, because beneath your feet, hidden in stone and darkness, another sound hums, constant, flowing, echoing like the heartbeat of the city itself. Next, you'll follow the water, down into the aqueducts, drains and fountains that never truly slept either. You leave the roaring harbour behind, stepping away from the clatter of crates, the singing sailors, the furious donkeys, and the mysterious fish-related accidents that seem to happen every 5 seconds. The noise fades, but only because a new kind of sound is waiting for you, humming beneath the surface. You walk uphill toward the inner city, and gradually you begin to hear it, a low, steady rumble. Not voices, not carts, not animals. Something deeper, something continuous, something that doesn't care if it's day or night. Water, moving through stone, endlessly. You follow the sound as it thickens under your feet, and soon you're standing near the mouth of an aqueduct channel, a raised stone path carrying water into the city like a lifeline. The flow is powerful, crashing against the sides with a rhythmic splash that echoes through the night air. It's strangely soothing, or it would be if it weren't so incredibly loud. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient cities relied on aqueducts, cisterns, public fountains, and massive drainage systems. These weren't quiet, hidden utilities. They were active, audible parts of daily life. Water thundered through tunnels, reservoirs echoed, fountains blasted constantly, drains gurgled like subterranean monsters, and repairs happened whenever they were needed, including at night. You walk along the aqueduct's edge, The channel roars with the force of a river forced into a cage. Water slams against stone, hissing, churning, spitting droplets into the air. As you lean over to look, a cold mist sprinkles your face. It's refreshing, until a sudden splash hits you square in the eye like the aqueduct decided to assert dominance. Joke number 1. You blink dramatically, trying to maintain dignity while a passing child gives you a sympathetic thumbs up. A few steps ahead, the aqueduct ducks underground, feeding water toward the city's cisterns. You follow the slope downward into a side street, where a team of workers is performing maintenance on a drainage channel. They're knee-deep in water, shouting instructions that echo so loudly the walls hum. One man calls, "Block it!" Another responds, "It is blocked!" A third shouts, "Then why am I still getting wet?" You decide not to get closer. The quirky tidbit of the night comes into view as you spot a water clock. Yes, an actual clock powered by dripping water, set outside a magistrate's building. It measures time by the controlled flow of liquid through a series of small containers. Sounds quiet, right? Nope. The dripping is amplified by a bronze basin below it, making each drop ring like a tiny bell. Drip, drip, drip. A never-ending reminder that time, and plumbing, waits for no one. You walk deeper into the residential district and the sound changes again. Now you hear the bubbling and splashing of public fountains. In many ancient cities, water flowed through fountains constantly, partly for beauty, partly for access, partly because shutting it off required more engineering effort than anyone wanted to bother with at 2 a.m. The result? A permanent echoing wet soundtrack. You approach one now. The fountain sprays downward in a shimmering cascade, landing in a large stone basin with a persistent splosh, splosh, splosh that fills the square. People sit nearby filling jars even at this hour. Late workers, early risers, insomniacs, and a man who looks like he's arguing with his own reflection. Historians still argue whether the constant sound of water was soothing or irritating for ancient residents. Some sources praise the calming presence of fountains and baths. Others complain about the unceasing rush and thunderous drains. You're leaning toward the second interpretation, because this fountain could drown out a marching band. You step around the basin and feel the stone vibrate beneath you. Underground drains rush with water from baths, kitchens, streets, and runoff from last night's rooftop washing. The gurgling is loud, travelling through the ground like whispers from the underworld. Every so often, you hear a louder whoosh as a floodgate opens somewhere downstream. A man approaches with a shovel and begins cleaning debris out of a grated drain. The water splashes violently as he pulls out leaves, straw, food scraps, and something that might once have been a sandal. He mutters swear-like phrases that would definitely get him scolded by a priest. He wrings out his tunic with a loud squelch that echoes too vividly for your comfort. Joke number 2. He looks at you and deadpans, "Don't become a drain worker," as though this were a traditional blessing. You continue walking and soon reach a large cistern access point covered by a heavy bronze grate. The rumble beneath it is impressive, like a subwoofer buried underground. Water slams into the reservoir from above, sending vibrations up through the metal. You place your hand on it and feel the heartbeat of the city. Down a narrow alley, another team works on a broken pipe. Ancient cities used terracotta pipes, which cracked easily. One worker taps a pipe section with a wooden mallet, listening to the sound it makes. Tock, tock, gloop. "That one's broken," he announces. Another man replies, "They're all broken," which is probably accurate. A third worker lifts a replacement pipe and accidentally drops it. The crash echoes so loudly that a dog 2 streets over starts barking. The team groans. You wince. A pigeon above you flaps away offended. Joke number 3. One man checks the pipe for cracks, realizes it's shattered beyond repair, shrugs and says, "I meant to break this one anyway." You climb up from the cistern district into a quieter plaza, except it's not quiet. A decorative fountain burbles loudly in the center. Water pours from stone lion mouths into wide basins, splashing continuously. The stone amplifies every drop. The sound reverberates off surrounding walls, filling the space with liquid echoes. Children arrive with jars. A woman washes vegetables. A man rinses his hands repeatedly like he's rehearsing for a hygiene competition. A cat bats at the falling water, looking annoyed every time it gets splashed. And above it all, the fountain sings, loud, constant, relentless. In a city without engines, without hums of electricity, without air conditioners or traffic, water became the closest thing to white noise, except it wasn't white noise at all. It was a roar, a rush, a constant reminder that the city wasn't sleeping, and neither were you. You step away from the fountain, the sound trailing behind you like a stubborn companion. But the night is far from finished, because tonight, you're about to walk straight into a celebration, and ancient festivals didn't just disturb the peace, they obliterated it. You step out of the fountain square expecting, hoping, the noise might finally ebb. But the night has one more idea, and it hits you before you even see the source. Drums. Not the steady temple drums from earlier, not the workman's rhythm of carts or mills. These drums roll, they boom, they vibrate in your chest like thunder that decided to become a party. You turn onto a boulevard, and there it is, spreading like fire, glowing like a second sunrise. A festival, not a polite one, not a quiet one, not a let's gather in reverent peace one. This is the kind that makes you wonder if ancient people invented sleep only to never use it again. Torches flare everywhere. The streets pulse with colour, reds, golds, greens as banners flutter overhead. Musicians line the roadside with reed pipes, cymbals, drums, bells and clappers. Dancers whirl in circles. Children run in packs. Old women clap off beat with passionate enthusiasm. Someone in a mask that looks suspiciously like a lopsided goat waves a torch dramatically. A mainstream historical fact, festivals in ancient cities were frequent, elaborate, and loud. Rome had over 100 public feast days a year. Athens had monthly celebrations. Babylon and Thebes timed rituals to the lunar calendar. Nighttime processions, torchlit dances, and musical parades weren't rare. They were expected. If the gods wanted, noise the people delivered. You move through the crowd as a procession forms, priests leading, dancers behind, musicians on both sides. Behind them come celebrants carrying statues on wooden platforms. The platforms creak loudly under the weight. The bearers grunt in unison, feet stamping rhythmically on the stone. One man shouts, "Up!" Another shouts, "Left!" Another shouts, "No, your other left!" Joke number 1. They nearly turn into a wall before correcting course. The music is chaotic. Reed pipes shriek bright, thin notes. Drums boom like rolling thunder. Someone shakes a bronze rattle with the intensity of a man trying to summon a lightning bolt. Cymbals crash. Bells ring. Horns blare. The sound mixes into a wild, unstoppable wave. A quirky tidbit rises right in front of you when a group of dancers passes by, carrying what look like flaming wheels. In some festivals across Persia, the Near East, and even parts of early Europe, participants rolled burning wheels or torches to symbolize the sun, rebirth, or the turning of seasons. These wheels crackle loudly, sending sparks flying, and several dancers shout cheerful warnings like, "Don't touch," which feels obvious but appreciated. You dodge out of their path. Nearby, vendors weave through the crowd selling festival snacks, roasted nuts, honey cakes, wine mixed with herbs. Their voices add to the chorus, "Hot nuts, sweet cakes, wine for courage, wine for regression." Someone buys 2 cups of wine and spills both immediately. He doesn't seem upset. Historians still argue whether festivals functioned as social glue or controlled chaos. Some describe them as sacred events meant to unite communities. Others complain about riots, drunken fights, burned roads, and musicians who treated volume as a religious obligation. Judging from tonight, both views are correct. The dancers swirl closer, their sandals slap the pavement in fast rhythms, their gold bracelets clatter, the feathers on their costumes rustle. One spins too fast and nearly wipes out 3 people. Everyone cheers. Meanwhile, the musicians escalate. A drummer begins pounding with such commitment you half expect his drum to break. A flute player, red in the face, pushes notes so high they could summon dogs from other cities. A hornblower misfires a note that sounds exactly like a distressed walrus. Joke number 2, he pretends it didn't happen, but everyone absolutely heard it. Suddenly the procession stops. The crowd hushes. A priest raises a bowl and chants a blessing. For 3 glorious seconds, relative silence. Then someone in the back sneezes loudly. Everyone laughs. The drums resume with double intensity. Shouts rise as celebrants start tossing small offerings, nuts, fruit, maybe coins, into the crowd. People scramble, cheering. One man yells, "I got one!" as if he's won a national award. Children weave between adults waving small reed torches. Their parents shout things, like "wave it lower" and "don't set your sister on fire." The children do not listen. Farther down, a troupe of masked performers reenacts a myth. Their costumes swish loudly as they stomp and leap. One performer whispers his lines too quietly, and another stage whispers, "Louder!" which the entire street hears. Joke number 3. The performer overcorrects, shouting so loudly even the priests turn around. A singer begins leading a call and response hymn. His voice cracks spectacularly halfway through. The crowd hesitates, but then cheers, encouraging him to try again. He does, and cracks a second time. The cheering grows louder, the atmosphere is wild, jubilant, barely controlled chaos. Smoke curls through the air, music shakes the street, feet pound, hands clap, bells ring, fire pops, voices rise like waves. The city was already loud tonight, but this festival is a joyful explosion of sound that doesn't just fill the streets, it owns them. And as you drift away from the celebration, following a quieter side path, you're certain of one thing. Sleep was not invented for ancient city life, and the architecture absolutely did not help. Because next you'll see how the very design of these homes made silence an impossible dream. You leave the festival district with your ears buzzing like someone stuffed a beehive into your skull. Drums still echo behind you, bells shimmer in the distance. Someone shouts a celebratory phrase you're pretty sure isn't even a word. But as you step deeper into the city, the noise shifts again. Less chaotic, less musical, but still very much present. Because now you're entering a part of the ancient world nobody today truly understands. Homes designed for airflow, not privacy, not quiet, and definitely not sleep. You turn down a sloping lane flanked by tall, narrow buildings. Windows gape open, doorways breathe out warm air, rooftops glow faintly under the rising moon. And instantly, you realize the truth. Ancient architecture made silence impossible. A mainstream historical fact sets the foundation. Most ancient homes, especially in hot climates, were built for ventilation. Thick walls kept the interiors cool, but windows were left open. Courtyards were central, and rooftops were used as extra living space. People slept outside in summer, cooked outside year-round, and stored goods on upper terraces. Sound travelled freely, bouncing through open spaces like gossip with wings. You breathe in the night air, warm, dusty, carrying hints of smoke and herbs, and step closer to a cluster of homes built around a shared courtyard. Inside, a family is finishing late-night chores. A woman beats dust from a mat. Whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. A man sharpens a tool. Shh, shh. A child practicing with a wooden hoop lets it clatter repeatedly against the wall. Someone laughs. Someone complains. Someone sneezes loudly enough to set off the neighborhood dog choir. You keep walking, and the noise thickens. Above you, a family sits on their flat roof enjoying the cooler air. Rooftop life was normal, cooking, chatting, washing clothes, or just lying under the stars. Right now, they're eating something crunchy. Loudly. So loudly you consider whether ancient snacks were designed by percussionists. One man on the roof shouts to someone on the street below. The person on the street shouts back. Neither considers simply walking closer. Joke number 1. They hold a full 3-minute conversation at maximum volume about whether the goat has been fed. You move on. Another house has its wooden shutters propped open. Inside, you see and hear a weaving loom. The thumping rhythm of the loom head hitting the frame echoes through the street. Looms weren't delicate instruments. They were wooden beasts with loud personalities. A woman working it hums a tune, then stops to scold someone outside the frame. The scolding is even louder than the loom. Next door, someone snores. No, not snores. S-N-O-R-E-S. Like a mountain collapsing in slow motion. You look up and see a man sleeping on his rooftop bed, mouth wide, chest rising, sound echoing into the street like a foghorn. 2 houses away, another man yells, "Turn over!" The snorer does not turn over. Historians still argue whether ancient homes were acoustically worse or simply felt louder because of denser populations. But archaeological reconstructions show how sound carried. Open courtyards acted like drums, narrow alleys amplified noise, and multi-story insulae funneled every whisper upward. Privacy was optional, acoustic chaos was guaranteed. You turn into a smaller alley, so narrow you could touch both walls with your hands. The noise here feels concentrated, like it's been forced through a funnel. Pots clatter behind one door, someone sweeps behind another. Two cats fight somewhere overhead with angry yowls that make you glance up instinctively. A window swings open above you. A woman yells, "Who took my basket?" Someone across the alley immediately replies, "Not me!" The woman narrows her eyes. "You always say that." He shouts back, "Because it's always true." You slip away before being pulled into court-mandated basket arbitration. On another rooftop, two teenagers sit under the stars whispering secrets. Well, trying to whisper. The open architecture amplifies even their soft voices into something audible. You catch half a conversation that includes "my cousin's donkey," "your mother's cooking," and "don't tell anyone." You mentally promise to keep their secrets safe and agree that their mother's cooking sounds concerning. The quirky tidbit for this section emerges as you pass a home with a long bamboo pole extending from the upper level. On the end is a small cloth bundle. This is a drying rack, a common feature in many ancient cities. People hung clothing, herbs, fish, or grains out to dry overnight. When the wind blew, these racks creaked loudly and sometimes knocked against the wall. Tonight, the pole beats a slow rhythm, clack, 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 like the world's least soothing metronome. Farther up, a family in an open courtyard finishes preparing tomorrow's food. A man grinds grain with a quern stone. Grunk, grunk, grunk. The rhythmic scrape echoing through the passage. A girl washes vegetables in a basin, splashing water onto the ground. A boy tries to chase a chicken out the door, yelling with pure commitment. The chicken refuses to leave. A dog barks. Another one answers. Another one debates. Soon, 5 dogs form a committee and bark in organised chaos. Joke number 2. You consider nominating a chairperson, but one dog is already acting like he holds the title. Suddenly, from the rooftop above, someone begins playing a flute. Not beautifully, not gently, not even on purpose, perhaps. The notes squeak and wiggle, rising into the night like confused birds. Someone inside the house yells, "Stop practicing!" The practicing continues, louder. And then, from somewhere else, you hear laughter. A whole group laughing together, warm and honest. A family sharing jokes under the stars. The sound drifts through the air, softened by distance, blending with the hum of life all around. But the peace does not last. Because air-designed architecture may let laughter travel, but it also lets arguments travel. You hear one now, 2 voices rising, then a third joining in, then a baby crying because everyone else is crying. A man slams a door. Another door slams in response. The narrow alley magnifies the booms like cannon fire. A clay jug falls from a windowsill and shatters. No one reacts. This seems to be normal. Joke number 3. You feel bad for the jug, but worse for whoever now has to explain why their laundry water smells like vinegar. You step into a slightly wider street, and for a moment the city breathes again. You smell olive oil, wet stone, wood smoke, and faint perfume drifting from a doorway. Above you, lanterns sway gently. A breeze whispers through palm leaves, and even though noise fills every corner, it feels less chaotic now, just constant. You're beginning to understand the truth. Ancient cities could not be silent. They weren't designed for silence. They weren't expected to be silent. Silence was the one resource these homes never provided. You walk on, and ahead, you begin to hear a new sound. Soft footsteps, quick whispers, the rustle of sacks, the tap of wheels, the creak of something being pulled through the dark. Because the night has its own economy, people who work in shadows avoid the crowd and rely on darkness, and they're just starting their shift. You move deeper into the city, leaving behind the rooftop snorers, the cranky loom, the barking committee of dogs, and the grandmother who was absolutely ready to fight someone over a missing basket. The noise behind you fades, but only in pitch, not in presence, because now a different sound rises from the darkness ahead. Soft footsteps, wheels turning quietly, the faint shuff of cloth sacks brushing stone, whispers that stop the moment you appear, then start again the moment you pass. You've stepped into the world of the night traders, the secretive, quiet, but definitely not silent workers who handled everything the daytime economy didn't want to see. And they are busy. The street narrows again, and you spot the first figure, a courier gliding past you with surprising speed, a wrapped bundle tucked securely under his arm. His sandals barely make a sound, but his breathing does. He panting slightly, muttering something like, "Late, always late," before disappearing into a side passage. A mainstream historical fact kicks in immediately. Nighttime labour was essential in ancient cities. Couriers, sweepers, smugglers, porters, lamplighters, fish sellers, charcoal carriers, bakers' assistants, and mid-level merchants preferred the cool, dark hours. Contracts were delivered, debts were collected, goods were moved without crowd interference, and rules became flexible, which meant the night economy hummed like a quiet machine, not silent, just intentionally less noticeable. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a man wheeling a small handcart. He stops short, looks at you, then smiles awkwardly before pulling the cart into a shadow. The cart creaks with a soft, sorrowful groan. Inside, you glimpse small pottery jars swaddled in straw, maybe oil, maybe medicine, maybe something a little untaxed. Joke number 1, the man looks like someone whose entire personality is, "I'm not doing anything illegal," which is absolutely what someone doing something illegal would look like. Farther ahead, a pair of women carry cloth-wrapped bundles balanced on their hips. They talk in low voices, their words bubbling softly, punctuated by the occasional clink of glass. Every time they pass a doorway, they fall silent, then resume speaking once they've moved on. Urban stealth, ancient addition. In another alley, you find a group of young men huddled around a small lantern. They're weighing something on a scale, maybe herbs, maybe spices, maybe something valuable enough that they all look nervously up every few seconds. One of them whispers, "Quickly," another whispers, "Carefully," and a third whispers, "Don't drop it again." Their entire operation is quiet in theory, but loud in anxiety. The quirky tidbit for this section strolls in as you step into a wider street and see a man sweeping with a long broom. But he's not cleaning, he's signalling. In certain ancient cities, especially port hubs, night sweepers acted as informal messengers for smugglers and traders. A sweeping pattern in front of a doorway meant safe. A tap of the broom on a wall meant wait. Scraping twice meant guards nearby. Tonight, this man sweeps diagonally, pauses, taps once, then keeps moving. You definitely were not meant to see that. You look away immediately, but he saw you see it. He nods politely anyway. You walk faster. Historians still argue whether the majority of night labour was legitimate or shady. Some accounts describe hard-working porters, bakers, and cleaners. Others paint portraits of night wanderers trading forbidden goods or settling debts quietly. The truth, predictably, is both. The night was when honest workers and sketchy entrepreneurs coexisted, each pretending the other didn't exist. Ahead, a man pushes a heavy wheelbarrow. It creaks loudly no matter how gently he moves. Inside it, coal lumps for early morning hearths. He wipes sweat from his brow, muttering about how people don't understand how heavy coal is. A woman ordering coal from her doorway yells, "Bring it upstairs!" He yells back, "That's not how stairs work!" Joke number 2. She insists, he refuses, and their negotiation escalates into what sounds like a comedy routine. You turn down another alley and spot a solitary figure carrying a covered cage. Inside, something chirps. Not like a bird, not like anything comforting. You decide not to ask. A bit farther along, you see 2 men carefully rolling a sealed amphora down the street, one supporting the top, the other guiding the bottom. They whisper about payment, delivery times, and the man with the scar. One of them misjudges the angle, and the amphora bumps loudly against the wall. They both freeze, wait, listen, then exhale in relief and keep rolling. A woman approaches carrying a wicker basket covered with a cloth. The basket rustles. She whispers soothingly to it. The cloth shifts. You suspect a chicken. You sincerely hope it's a chicken. She picks up speed before you can confirm. Sounds accumulate everywhere. The squeak of a door opening for a late-night delivery, the dull thump of someone unloading small sacks in the dark, the shuffle of sandals against stone, the clink of coins changing hands in a hurry, the rustle of innkeepers dragging out trash before sunrise. Then you hear a sharper sound, wheels turning fast. A small 2-wheeled cart zips past, pulled by a teenager who looks thrilled to be going faster than physics intended. Behind him, 2 crates bounce dangerously. He shouts, "Coming through!" with the confidence of someone who has no brakes. People jump aside. A cat leaps dramatically. The cart skids, corrects, and continues. Joke number 3, someone shouts after him, "Slow down," and he responds, "I can't." You continue onward and notice a man lighting street lamps with a long pole. Each time he raises the flame to a lamp, the fire catches with a sharp pop. He moves methodically, mumbling in a tired rhythm, up, light, down, next. His sandals shuffle. His pole clacks against the ground. Even small sounds feel big in the night. Through an open workshop door, a woman grinds herbs with a mortar and pestle. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Another mixes powders in small bowls. They're preparing medicines for morning customers. Their soft voices blend with the grinding, creating a strangely soothing, yet still audible, soundscape. A courier runs past you again carrying a different parcel this time. He looks increasingly panicked. You suspect time is not his strong suit. And then, just as you're beginning to adapt to the secretive hum of the night economy, everything suddenly changes. A bell rings. A shout echoes down the street. A second shout follows, higher, sharper. You see people look up. Traders glance toward the sound. Sweepers freeze. A man with a sack quietly retreats into a shadow. You smell smoke. Faint, distant, but growing. Because the next sound the city makes tonight is the sound no ancient resident ever wanted to hear. Fire. And ancient cities didn't whisper about fire, they screamed. Before you even turn the corner, you feel it. An ancient primal shift in the air. Noise doesn't just rise, it sharpens. Voices tighten, footsteps quicken. A ripple of panic spreads like heat through cloth. Because in a city built of wood, cloth, oil lamps, dry roofs, and dreams held together by wishful carpentry, fire is the monster everyone fears. A bell rings again, hard, fast, metallic. Someone shouts, "Fire!" Another voice picks it up. Then another. Then 10 more. The word spreads like sparks in dry grass. You break into a fast walk following the rising smoke. The faint glow ahead confirms it. An upper-story window flickers unnaturally, orange licking the dark sky. Someone shouts from inside. Someone screams for help. Doors slam open. Feet thunder downstairs that absolutely can't handle this level of urgency. A mainstream historical fact ignites in your mind. Ancient cities were catastrophically vulnerable to fire. Rome burned repeatedly. Athens suffered devastating blazes. Markets, warehouses, tenements, anything with dry wood, oil, or cloth could ignite with terrifying ease. Firefighting forces existed in some cities, but they were slow, understaffed, or arrived with buckets instead of miracles. You turn the corner, and chaos erupts like a struck drum. People are already rushing forward with buckets. The fire hasn't fully opened into the street yet, but glowing embers spit out of a top-floor window. A wooden shutter catches fire with a sudden whoosh. Someone below screams, "Water! Water!" A line forms, neighbours, traders, even a half-asleep drunk man who somehow becomes incredibly efficient under pressure. They pass buckets hand to hand, sloshing water everywhere except where they intend. One bucket spills, one shatters. Someone cries, "Faster!" Someone else yells, "I am going fast!" You jump aside as a woman barrels past with a clay jar bigger than she is. She heaves it upward toward the bucket chain, misses dramatically, and water splashes across the street in a loud, wet explosion. Joke number 1. Someone cheers anyway, shouting, "Good effort!" Above, a man leans out the burning window, coughing violently. Neighbours shout for him to jump into a stretched-out cloth held by several men. He hesitates. They yell louder. He hesitates again. One man shouts, "It's this or the flames." The man jumps. The cloth holds. The crowd erupts in cheers, then immediately goes back to yelling about buckets. Sparks scatter into the alley. Someone stomps them out with aggressive sandal slaps. A woman beats a burning piece of thatch with a broom. A man with a laundry dampener swings wildly at a flaming shutter fragment, sending it skittering across the cobbles. It lands at your feet, hissing. The quirky tidbit comes flying at you, literally, when you notice several men using long poles with wet cloths tied around their tips. These are ancient fire beaters. They slap and smother small flames, and right now they're doing it with the intensity of professional mosquito slappers. One guy hits a flame, misses the flame, hits his friend in the knee and yells, "You moved!" His friend yells, "It was my knee!" Another bucket sloshes onto the building. Another. Steam whooshes upward with a hiss. The fire crackles angrily, raging through the upper floor. Smoke billows. Someone shouts for people to clear the area. Someone else grabs more cloths and starts wetting them in a trough. Historians still argue whether ancient firefighting forces were effective or symbolic. Some cities had organized vigils, trained to respond to fire emergencies. Others relied on neighbors and chaos. Tonight you're watching the neighbors and chaos method in all its frantic glory. Suddenly a door is kicked open and a family spills out, carrying a basket of belongings, coughing heavily. The father clutches a pottery jar like it contains all their wealth. The mother carries a squawking chicken, fully convinced it is part of the rescue team. A little girl drags a half-burnt doll whose hair is now even more terrifying than before. A watchman arrives, banging a staff on the ground. "Clear a path," he shouts, pushing through the crowd. He loudly announces instructions, which mostly involve repeating, "Stop panicking," to a group of people who are understandably not going to stop panicking. Joke number 2, the watchman's helmet slips over his eyes every time he shouts, but he refuses to acknowledge it. More smoke billows from the window, darker now, heavier. One wall beam cracks with a sound like a tree splitting. A man yells, "The roof!" Everyone looks up. The thatch is smouldering. Sparks cascade like angry fireflies. 2 men start throwing water upward. It splashes everywhere except the roof. One bucket drenches a completely innocent cat. The cat screams in betrayal and bolts into the night. You retreat slightly as heat pours into the street. More residents join the bucket line. Water sloshes. Clay jars crack. Someone trips. Someone shouts. Someone loses a sandal and yells louder about the sandal than the fire. The noise is overwhelming. Not chaotic like the festival. Not rhythmic like the workshops. This is raw. Human fear turned into sound. Coughing, shouting, splashing, running, stomping, creaking, cracking. Another watchman arrives with a horn and blows it so loudly you jump like you've been personally attacked by Zeus. The blast pierces the night, echoing down every alley. More neighbors flood into the street. Together, finally, the group manages to smother the flames licking from the window. Smoke pours out, but flames no longer leap. Someone cheers too early. Someone else yells, "Not done yet," and points to the roof. A crew climbs a ladder, coughing and swatting embers. One brave soul throws a wet blanket over the last stubborn patch of flame. It hisses, it steams, and then silence. Well, not real silence, just the sudden absence of fire. The crowd exhales collectively. A child starts crying in relief. A man coughs loudly. Someone laughs nervously. Buckets clank. A woman scolds her husband for dropping their best jar during the chaos. Joke number 3, someone proudly announces, "We did it," only for a single ember to spark again. The crowd groans, stomps it out instantly, and then cheers very cautiously. The danger fades. The smoke thins. The fire is gone. But your heart is still racing, and your ears are still ringing, because ancient cities weren't afraid of noise. They were afraid of silence that meant something had collapsed. You continue down the street, feeling the adrenaline ebb from the air. People slowly return home. Tools are gathered. Soot-stained workers slump against walls. And as you walk away, deeper into the quieting quarter, you hear a different kind of sound rising. Whispers. Prayers. Soft footsteps. The muffled voices of people who can't sleep. Because tonight, you'll finally meet those who lived their whole lives in sleepless cities, and the strange ways they tried to cope. The fire fades behind you. First the glow, then the smoke, then the shouting, until all that's left is the sticky memory of panic humming in your chest. You walk deeper into the night, letting your heartbeat settle, letting the air cool your skin, and for the first time in hours the city almost feels quiet. Almost. Because now, in this lull between chaos and dawn, you hear something else entirely. A cough, a sigh, someone whispering, someone pacing, a baby fussing, a tired laugh, a prayer murmured into the dark. You've stumbled into the part of the ancient night that every city dweller knew too well. The long, restless hours when sleep refuses to come, and everyone tries, badly, to cope. Welcome to the domain of the sleepless citizens. You step into a narrow residential street. The lamps here burn low, the air cools, families retreat to their beds, but through open windows and rooftop terraces, you hear all the sounds of a population trying to force rest in a world that simply will not shut up. A mainstream historical fact drifts in like smoke. Insomnia was widely recorded in ancient cities. Writers complained bitterly about noisy neighbours, clattering carts, late-night parties, barking dogs, snoring families, and restless slaves moving through hallways. Remedies existed, herbs, prayers, charms, but nothing truly silenced the city. Ancient people slept lightly, in short bursts, often waking multiple times through the night. You hear it now, someone whispering to their partner, "Try breathing slower." "I am breathing slower." "You're breathing loud slower." You keep walking. On a rooftop, a man lies on a thin mat, staring at the stars in full existential crisis mode. He mutters something like, "Should have married the other one," then sighs loudly, loud enough that the neighbour on the next roof sighs back in solidarity. Joke number 1, the sighing becomes contagious, and soon 3 houses are sighing in a chain reaction of collective exhaustion. You pass a doorway where an old woman sits grinding herbs in a small mortar. Crunk, crunk, crunk. The smell drifts into the street. Lavender, poppy, chamomile. She glances at you and says, "Tea helps some people sleep, doesn't help me." Then she shrugs and keeps grinding. A quirky tidbit slides into view here. Ancient insomniacs often used dream charms, small carved figures, woven talismans, magical papyrus spells tucked under pillows. Some wrote prayers on pottery shards and placed them by the door. Others placed sprigs of specific plants above their beds to ward off nightmares or noisy spirits. Tonight you see several doorways decorated with herbs tied in twine. Fennel, mint, rue, something suspiciously sharp-looking. As you continue, you hear someone chanting quietly. Soft, rhythmic, soothing. It's a prayer to a household spirit asking for restful sleep. The chant is peaceful, until a donkey brays loudly 2 streets over and the chanter instantly stops to swear at fate. Historians still argue whether sleep deprivation was simply accepted in ancient life or considered a medical concern. Some say people shrugged it off. Others describe healers prescribing herbal mixtures, massages, warm baths, and even ritual incantations to treat stubborn insomnia. The truth is likely a mix. Some people suffered silently, others demanded every trick in the scroll book. You turn into another alley and see a man pacing with a toddler on his hip. The child cries with the rage of a small god. The father bounces him, shushing repeatedly, whispering, "Shh, shh, you must sleep." The child rejects this reality and screams louder. An older neighbour leans out a window and says, "Try rocking in a circle." The man tries. The neighbour says, "Counterclockwise." The man changes direction. The baby screams harder. Joke number 2. The neighbour, utterly unfazed, shrugs and says, "Well, it works for my goat." You round another bend and suddenly hear gentle singing, soft, low, melodic. You pause. A mother rocks her child in a courtyard, chanting an old lullaby. The melody drifts through the night like warm smoke. For a moment the city feels tender, until a rooster crows. Again, way too early. The mother's lullaby cuts off instantly. Someone else, half awake, shouts, "Not yet!" Another person shouts, "That rooster has one job!" The rooster, unfazed, crows again. Joke number 3. Someone threatens to turn that bird into breakfast, and the rooster responds with its loudest crow yet, like it's calling their bluff. You pass by a window where someone tosses and turns audibly. Sheets rustle. A man groans. Why is everything loud? His wife mutters, "Because the gods hate quiet." He groans again. He's not disproving her theory. On another rooftop, 2 women sit cross-legged, whispering gossip because they can't sleep. Their voices float down like drifting leaves. And then he said, "He didn't, he did, no, yes." You try not to listen, but they are projecting like Broadway performers. Someone below the rooftop yells up, "Some of us are trying to sleep." One woman yells back, "So are we." You walk farther until the street widens around a small shrine. A few sleepless citizens kneel there, whispering prayers for rest. A man lights incense. A woman clutches a small charm. Someone else mutters, "If the gods wanted me to sleep, they wouldn't have invented neighbours." Across the street, a young man tries a different remedy entirely. He drinks warm wine mixed with herbs. He takes a sip, grimaces, takes another and mutters, "Tastes like punishment." He takes a third sip anyway. A few houses down, A couple tries to sleep while their neighbour snores with the force of a collapsing mineshaft. They bang on the wall. No effect. They bang harder. The snorer pauses, snorts, then continues at full volume. The couple groans in defeat. You step into the shadow of an archway and listen. The night is wearing thin. People drift between exhaustion and wakefulness. Some keep working. Some lie awake in frustration. Some pray. Some complain. Some cook early breakfast because sleep gave up on them entirely. And you begin to understand something. Ancient people weren't just living in noisy cities. They were surviving them. Which brings you to the last stage of the night, because after hours of shouting, barking, praying, singing, clattering, arguing, and panicking, exhaustion finally wins, and the moment of surrender changes everything. You leave the alley of insomniacs behind, stepping into a soft grey light creeping across the city's edge. Dawn isn't here yet, not fully, but it's thinking about it. And the city, after an entire night of clamour, chaos, drums, carts, roosters, arguments, gods, donkeys, and one extremely dramatic fire, finally reaches the rarest sound in its entire existence. Quietish. Not quiet. Not silence. Just a softened version of noise. And the people living here knew exactly what this moment meant. This is the moment ancient citizens finally surrender to the night. Even if the night was almost over. You walk down a broader street now, lit by faint starlight and the last flickers of oil lamps. A cool breeze sweeps through the alley, carrying scents of ash, bread dough from a baker finishing his shift, smoke from dying torches, and the faint sweetness of crushed herbs left out to dry. People are winding down, not sleeping, winding down. There's a difference. A man sits on his doorstep, head resting against the wall, eyes half closed. He's been awake for hours, but looks like he might melt into sleep at any second. A dog beside him yawns so loudly it startles itself. Your mainstream historical fact arrives quietly. Ancient people slept in segments. First sleep and second sleep, with a waking period in between. A phase for prayers, chores, talking, or simply waiting for exhaustion to force eyes shut again. Historians debate the pattern, but many agree. Truly uninterrupted sleep was nearly impossible in ancient cities. People adapted by sleeping in waves. Tonight you've walked through every reason why. You continue forward, passing a rooftop where a woman lies back on a mat, finally drifting toward consciousness. Not because the city went silent, but because she simply can't fight wakefulness any longer. Her breathing deepens, her head tilts. A family member drapes a cloth over her. She doesn't stir. Below her, in a courtyard, an old man sways slightly as he sits on a stool, hands folded. His eyes flutter closed. He hums a final, fading note of a lullaby he whispered to himself. Then his head drops forward. Sleep wins. Across the lane, a small child who fought rest all night finally collapses on her mother's lap mid-sentence. Her mother exhales in triumph. The victory is quiet but profound. Joke number 1, you hear a man mutter, "If I'm not awake in 2 hours, let me sleep another 3, which is mathematically confusing but emotionally relatable. A quirky tidbit rises with the breeze. Ancient people often slept outside in courtyards or rooftops during warm seasons. But they didn't always lie fully down. Some slept half-seated, believing it kept bad dreams away or helped digestion. Tonight you see 2 people asleep sitting up against a wall, heads drooping like wilted flowers. The city softens even more as you walk. A cart sits abandoned on the roadside, its owner having fallen asleep beside it, back against the wheel, arms crossed. The donkey beside him also sleeps, snoring gently through flared nostrils. A tavern owner, after hours of noise, sweeping and scolding drunks, leans on his counter and finally drops into sleep with his cheek pressed against a clay cup. A group of men who argued earlier now sit slumped in a circle, unfinished wine cups beside them, voices long gone. One's head rests on another's shoulder. Nobody has the energy to argue about personal space. Historians still argue whether ancient people found comfort in these shared exhaustion rituals. Some say surrendering to sleep together created community bonds. Others say people simply passed out because they were tired of yelling. Tonight the answer feels like both. The sky lightens, shadows fade, and you realize how the city's rhythm truly works. Noise rises in waves, chaos surges, daily life roars, night erupts, and then, At the thin edge of dawn, everything exhales. You turn onto a high street overlooking the rooftops. The city below stretches like a sleeping creature, arms tucked, breath steady, sounds dulled. Smoke rises gently from a few chimneys. Birds stir. Dogs curl up in corners. Humans finally surrender to the weight behind their eyes. Your final light joke arrives as you pass a man sleeping upright against a wall, mouth open, absolutely unaware that a pigeon has chosen his shoulder as a temporary perch. The pigeon, also exhausted, falls asleep with him. A duet of snores begins. You reach a plaza where a fountain continues to roar because water never sleeps, but even that sound seems softer now, wrapped in the cushion of morning air. People sitting nearby don't flinch at the splashing. Their bodies are too tired to resist rest any longer. The whole city feels wrapped in a fragile, temporary peace. You find a bench and sit for a moment, watching the sky lighten from deep indigo to soft blue. The horizon whispers of sunrise. The lamps flicker out one by one. A faraway rooster crows, still early, but this time nobody yells at it. Because now, after surviving the loudest night imaginable, the people of this ancient world finally drift into sleep. Not because the noise stopped, but because the noise became familiar, expected, unavoidable, and woven into the fabric of the life itself. You close your eyes for a moment. You can almost feel the city breathing. You can almost feel yourself drifting too. And as the warm light of dawn glows across the stone streets, you realize the night, loud as it was, wasn't trying to chase sleep away. It was simply alive, chaotic, messy, vibrant, human. And ancient people didn't fight it forever. They surrendered to it, just as you're doing now, just as this story gently fades into the soft hush of the morning. And now, as the last echoes of that ancient city soften in your mind, let everything begin to slow. Let the bright edges of the story blur into something warm, something distant, something safe. Imagine the stone streets empty now, washed in pale dawn light, every footstep long faded, every voice dissolved into the air. Even the fountains seem quieter, as if they too have softened their rhythm to match your breathing. Let your thoughts drift the way smoke rises from an early morning hearth, slow, lazy, lifting upward with no urgency. The world feels gentler now, stretched thin between night and day. You've walked through noise, through cluttered alleys, through crowds and commotion and voices that echoed like living shadows. But all of that is behind you. What's left now is quiet, a quiet that's earned, a quiet that settles over your shoulders like a warm blanket. Feel your breath deepen, even just a little. Feel the heaviness in your limbs, the pleasant weight of a long journey settling into rest. The city is no longer waking, it's sleeping, and you're part of that stillness now. You can let the sounds fade completely, as if someone is slowly turning down the volume of the world, one notch at a time. You can let the ancient streets empty. You can let the rooftops quiet. You can let the last drifting voices dissolve into morning. And as you lie there, listening to whatever soft hush surrounds you now, allow yourself to sink gently into that quiet. No need to hold anything up. No need to stay alert. Just rest. Just breathe. Just drift. When you're ready, sleep will find you, slowly, softly, and utterly on its own.